Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is
Recording in progress.
there we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Land Use Committee. I'm Andrea Kelly. I'm a counselor at large from Ward 3, and I'm the chair of the committee. With us tonight in the chamber from Ward 2, we have Tariq Lucas, who is the vice chair of the committee, me from Ward 3. From Ward 4, we have Councillor Randy Block. From Ward 6, we have Alan Lobovitz. Ward 7, President Mark Laredo. And from Ward 8, Stephen Farrell. Stephen, do you want to move to a different seat where you have a better view? Wherever you want to be, where you get a good view and you can see and hear what you need to. Go sit next to your friend Randy Block. Anyone who's not coming tonight. We're going to get started. I'd like to say too, we do have a couple of city staff members with us. Our clerk, Scott Matthews, right to my right here. From the planning department, we have Katie Wewell on Zoom and Joe Iadenisi. And Jonah Temple from the law department. We've just been joined too now by Allison Leary, our member from Ward 1 of the Land Use Committee. To start, we have a couple, 3 to be precise, requests for extensions of time to exercise special permits. The first one is number 395-24. Somebody want to talk to that from planning or the petitioner? No, okay. Is there somebody here, Mirtha Chang, for instance, for the 1349 Center Street extension of time request? And if not, we will discuss and vote on it without any comments from you, but if you're here and want to say something, we're happy to hear from you. I don't see a hand raised, so let's consider this request for an extension of time at 1349 Center Street. That's Ward 6. Councillor Lobovitz?
Is it appropriate to move that we accept this request?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I will move that.
Think we can do this on a voice vote? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is anyone opposed? All set. Mirtha Chang, you have an extension of time. The next one is number 394-24, which is a request for an extension of time at 255 Jackson Street. Mary Beth Johnson? Or, come up to the, real people, come to the podium there. Make sure the microphone is on. I'm looking at Zoom, and there you're right in front of me. Just please give us your name and address. And
showed up. My husband's also online, so.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're close, it works.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So we are in the process of still getting our permits for building. We did have a slight delay for financial reasons, but we're back on track and hope to have everything rolling very soon. So we're hoping we can get an extension so that we finish by the spring. So.
Ooh, fast.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
You know how it goes. You wish for that, but.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. Again, this is Ward 6. Councillor Lobovitz, would you like to make a motion for this?
I move that we accept the request for extension.
Any discussion around that? Let's vote. Voice call. Voice roll, not a roll call, voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Great. Good luck for this spring. And thanks for coming in person. Those are not comfortable seats. Our third and final request for an extension of time tonight is docket number 393-24, which is a request for an extension of time on the Craft Street and Court Street. I won't read all the numbers. We may have someone, I see someone at the podium. Mr. Bookbinder, would you like to say a few words about this?
Sure. Good evening. For the record, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Stephen Bookbinder, an attorney with the law firm of Schlesinger and Bookbinder, offices at 1200 Walnut Street, Newton Highlands. As you may recall, on November 7th of 2022, the City Council granted a zone change and a special permit for a proposed development at this site. On October 16th of 2023, the City Council granted an extension for 1 additional year. We're here tonight seeking the last and final extension, which would carry us through to November 6, 2025. Over the last several years, the developer and its senior housing operator have been trying to work out a variety of issues. It may be that we go in a different direction and actually come back with a multifamily development. We've actually socialized that with members of the neighborhood and local counselors, but at this point, things are still not nailed down, and I think it's always my advice to the client, try to get the extension, you keep your optionality and flexibility, and we'll see how this thing plays out. So that's why we're here tonight.
Thank you for that brief update. I think there will probably be some questions and comments from the committee. I see one hand up. We'll start with Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Buckbinder, thank you. I know you are still in the very, very beginning phases of a potentially new zone change and special permit. If that does come to fruition, when do you anticipate a different special permit coming to the Land Use Committee?
Sure, fair question, Counselor. I think it's really, really difficult to tell. One of the things that would be required if we shift gears and go in that direction would be to change the lot area per unit, the requirement to 1,200 square feet. That would have to go through ZAP, I'm pretty sure, and I think that would take some time. So I would hope we'd get into you in 2025 sometime. Certainly won't be in the immediate future. It might or might not be within the next year. And again, that's why we're just trying to keep options open.
Okay, so this is really an extension of time mainly for flexibility.
Absolutely, positively.
Okay, all right. I'm all set. Thanks.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, Councilor Leary? Or not? No. Did you have your hand up, Councilor Laredo? No. You were all just waving at me. Councilor Block.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the petitioner. It has to do with other development that's being planned on Craft Street and the extent to which this recently approved development on Craft Street was included in the calculations of traffic congestion and any other aspects of the plan. I ask this because traffic analysis is supposed to include not just current traffic, but also anticipated changes to the environment. And I'm wondering if he knows about the extent of this inclusion in the analysis that was done, I guess, in 2022.
Sure. So, Councilor Block, I don't have any knowledge myself. I did not represent the petitioner before the ZBA. I really didn't monitor the hearings. I would only presume, since this project had already been approved and was still under extension, that they would have asked for data on this project at that time, but I can't verify that.
Thank you for that. I'm really reluctant to vote for an extension when so much is going on Craft Street that was, I think, not considered originally. So I'm going to ask that we consider at least holding this and trying to collect more information about what was in the original plan and how it interacts with approvals that have happened since then. And I mean, my inclination is that this should be allowed to end with the current extension, and a new plan, whatever that may be, can come back before us. So that's just how I'm feeling about it now, because so much is going on Craft Street. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Block. Councillor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Councillor Block's question. It is a good one. I was involved with this project when it first came before us, and with that time, we did know that there was probably going to be another large project there. And I remember quite a few details about traffic calming, but not necessarily issues dealing with actual data on cars. So I'm happy to share that with you, but what I'm thinking here is that the client, the developer is asking for an extension of time, and I think the appropriate time to evaluate the project and to make decisions whether or not we would approve it or not would be when it comes back to us. I'm not sure that I feel comfortable with refusing an extension of time based on another project that's in the area. Though certainly that's something to take into consideration when if and when we get to the point when this project comes before us for actual discussion. And it may have to go through a zoning change, as we just heard from Mr. Bookbinder. So I think there's a lot of things that still need to be talked about and discussed if this even does come before us again. So I would not be voting no on this. I allow the extension of time, but I would certainly be very involved in the process going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Leary. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Councillor Lucas?
I'm going to move that we accept this request for an extension of time for 1 year.
Motion has been made. I'll just say that Councillor Leary pretty much took the words out of my mouth. I would have said that the issues and concerns that Councillor Block is raising are appropriate, but at the time when we're considering the actual proposal, not a request for an extension of time. I think later is when we will get into the details of what more needs to be researched. Would you like to say something before we take a vote? Councillor Block.
Well, yes, I was not a member of this committee, much less the city council, when this was originally approved. So how common is it to do just a 1-year extension rather than, I guess, a 2-year extension? I mean, is 1 year at a time what usually comes before this committee?
Very typical. In fact, my own personal recollection, don't hold me to it, was that they wanted a 2-year extension at the time, and we granted them a 1-year extension. So I feel like they're sort of back for that extra year they originally wanted, and we didn't grant them 1 year. Even in your time on the council, even you new members, we've seen many requests for extension of time for 1 year on projects. It's the most typical time period that we see before us.
Well,
so
thanks for that reminder. I mean, this is unlike the previous petitioner that we just voted on, this is a very large project being affected by other large projects, which is why I raised this question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Again, with a request for extension of time, I'll say that I don't think that the size or complexity of the project should necessarily be a factor for whether we grant a request for an extension, just to respond to that part. President Laredo.
I'll be brief. I think, Chair Kelly, you've stated it correctly. To me, the question is, using our discretionary judgment, is there a reasonable cause to extend the deadline? And generally, that could be just like the last folks we had in who were having some issues about designing their parking and they needed more time to do that. It might be a problem getting materials or other things. It might be a problem executing a contract with a contractor or a contractor backing out, lots of things. Here, I think there's some issues with the partnership that the developer formed to begin with. I can't judge whether that is, who is at fault in the breakup of that relationship, but the point is, it's not a situation where someone's just sitting there completely stagnant and not proffering any reason for the extension. So I actually don't think it's appropriate for us to look at what else may be going on next door. I think Councilor Leary's right. We knew that when they came in. On the other hand, they come in with a new request or a new petition, we're going to look at it completely afresh with the benefit of knowing that the ZBA has approved a project next door that's going to, it's a significant project. So, that's going to be their call as to how they proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, President Laredo. Any other comments? We do have a motion on the floor. Councilor Block, I felt like you were maybe going to make a motion to hold, but Councilor Lucas beat you to a motion to approve, so let's take that one up first. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? Or abstain will be my next question. Thank you. All right, it passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just keeping track here. The next item we have is a request for a special permit to allow parking in the front setback within 5 feet of the front lot line at 31 Chase Street. Do we have somebody from planning who would like to give us an overview of this?
Yes, Joe O'Donoghue from Planning, and I will give an overview. The property is 31 Chase Street, and they're looking to expand their driveway, which requires relief for their 2 parking spaces. As the parking is currently configured and has been configured and shown on plans, they have 1 existing recognized parking stall that is within 5 feet of the front lot line, so that is therefore non-conforming. They are proposing an expansion of the driveway that would have 2 recognized parking stalls, and with that, you are extending that nonconformity to allow that added space within 5 feet of the front lot line. And then you also have a new item of relief that you need for having 2 parking stalls within the front setback as well, as you are allowed 1. But having the second one requires a special permit. The criteria to consider with that are the criteria for non-conforming and the standard criteria. It's whether or not the site is an appropriate location. It is whether the second parking stall is developed and operated will adversely affect the neighborhood, whether or not it will create a nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians, whether access to the site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved, and then whether or not it would be substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming uses, and lastly, the parking criteria. If literal compliance with the number of parking stalls in the front setback is impracticable due to the nature of the use, location, size, width, depth, shape, or grade of the lot, or that such exceptions would be in the public interest or in the interest of safety or the protection of environmental features. A look at where the property is. It is zoned multi-residence 1 and also is within the Village Center Overlay District for the multi-residence transit. They have not opted into the Village Center Overlay District, and that is not what we have proposed. The area does have a good number of properties that are on smaller lots, including this one, which is at just over 7,000 square feet for the lot. And the majority of properties in the area have dwellings on them that were developed before cars became popular, with this one being developed with this current dwelling in 1900. So with that, you have kind of a design on the site that doesn't suit itself to having an adequate driveway by the zoning regulations, and that'll be a little bit clearer with the actual site plan. And lastly, one last thing to consider about the area as well is that it is within close proximity to the T and to the Newton Center, Village Center, which results in a decently larger amount of vehicle pedestrian traffic and parking in the area than you might have further away from that area. This is a look at the site conditions. I thought it would just be clear to bring this up front and show exactly how the parking is arranged before I show the site plans. On the left is how the parking was originally designed from Bing. You can see where that tree is on the right front corner of the lot. That tree fell down and was removed, and since has been replaced with a gravel area that someone in 2022 on Google Street View used for parking. With the tree having come down, that is not on site plans for this second parking stall on the right, which you can see there is the potential to fit a vehicle within the property there. But since that was not there more than 10 years ago on any of the plans, it is not recognized as non-conforming. This is a look at the existing and proposed. If you look on the left, that's the existing. There is definitely that space for the 19 by 9 foot parking stall. And there's not space with that gravel area there to add an additional parking stall, and that would require relief for adding that second parking stall, regardless of what that surface area is underneath there. As you can see on the right, it is 19.7 feet from the front lot line up to the corner of the porch. So even if you were to angle the spots, there isn't the adequate area to have 19 by 9, two 19 by 9 spaces on that driveway. Even if you angle that parking, you're going to have a corner that hangs out onto the sidewalk. Additionally, wanted to point out that the side setbacks aren't sufficient for a vehicle to pass around. With an 8.6 on the right and a 2.4 foot on the left, there isn't enough room for the vehicle to pass through. And additionally, it isn't necessarily feasible that they would be able to get some sort of an easement or arrangement to where they'd get to the back of the lot and establish parking there. On the right is what they have proposed, and that is where they are adding 98 square feet of gravel to the front right corner of the driveway. That will allow them to establish two 19 by 9 foot parking stalls. Lastly, just to comment, since there isn't really architectural plans or anything else to show on this, is that the site presents a lot of limitations given the existing size of the house and placement of the house, small size of the lot, and definitely was designed without parking in mind from the onset. The only real option to do anything by right would potentially be to remove some area of the porch and create more parking area there with some sort of an angled or a hooked kind of driveway design, potentially, that could remove the parking within 5 feet of the lot line. But even then, it would still be close and would depend on the exact design if they'd be able to remove both spaces from the 25-foot front setback. So difficult to imagine where exactly those parking stalls would be and whether or not those owners have a second parking stall. That doesn't mean that there's necessarily always going to be street parking available for them in the area, particularly given overnight parking bans and other difficulties in reliable street parking. And any sort of other places that they would look to establish parking might require an additional curb cut, which is not something that's always feasible or encouraged from the city. So that's all I have for my presentation, and I will turn it back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Iadinisi. Nice summary of it. I do believe I see the petitioner online. Is that person Kara Kendall or someone else representing
Yes.
the homeowners would like to speak to this? Go
Hey,
ahead.
this is Sarah. Thank you for saying my last name correctly. Very few people do that. And thank you for that presentation. I have nothing to add other than I just wanted the committee to know that we purchased this house in 2019, and at the time, the tree that is like legend in the neighborhood was already gone. And so we had no idea that we were out of compliance. We thought we had a fat but short driveway, and the impetus for this is currently that gravel patch is not only quite unsightly, our neighbors don't like it, nor do we. It also causes a lot of mess, as you can imagine, when it gets rainy. So that was the impetus for the special permit, is that we were trying to get the driveway in better shape, as well as the surrounding sidewalks, and then realized that we needed to go through this process given the way the property is configured. So but all of the plans were really well presented, and I appreciate the presentation, and thanks for your consideration.
Thanks. So you'll stay online in case there are any more questions for you? Thank you very much. Before we take it into committee, I'll ask if there are any members of the public who would like to make questions or comments. And I don't see anyone, which is a little bit of a surprise to me. So let's hear from Councilor Leary, and then Councilor Lobovitz, and then Laredo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's already essentially 2 parking spaces in the front of the house. They're just not official. So at this point, I was just looking at, I'm very familiar with this street, of course. And I've always been struck by how the other side of the street is lovely, long, safe sidewalk with very few curb cuts on it. And this other side of the street, you just see all the curb cuts and all the cars in the front setback all the way down. I understand the practicality of that, but it's always unfortunate to see. I think it really takes away from the beauty of those houses, and also adds added danger for pedestrians, for conflicts, for bicyclists, for conflicts. But I see up and down the street, that's sort of the way it is. And I understand it's a small lot, a big house on it, and there's not a lot of other options. It is very close to the T. It's a very walkable area. But since the petitioner is already parking there, and I think actually fixing that parking spot would be an improvement. And maybe I would ask if they could do pervious surface. And make some improvements to make it absorb water, and maybe make some improved plantings or some improvements to make it look nicer. Because I certainly understand what the petitioner's concern is with the way it looks now. So I'm inclined to approve it, but I would just like to hear some suggestions, maybe some comments back about what could be improved there and how we could make it, less of a heat island and pervious to rainwater, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're still on, Councilor Leary, Ms. Kendall, would you like to respond to the question about what materials you anticipate using for this improvement would you just be changing the paving material of the one kind of illegal dirt spot, or would you be changing them both together, and if so, with what material?
No, the plan is to change the whole driveway, to redo it all in the same material, and we'll certainly consider impervious. It's something that we're interested in as well, and to also redo the surrounding sidewalks and curbs. We'd like to do all of that, and I agree that it's unfortunate how the driveway has looked all this time. I was hoping to get it done earlier. I just didn't realize I needed to go through this process, to be honest.
Well, I'm glad you figured it out and you're here. So do you have ideas about what type of impervious material, like impervious pavers or cobbles, or do you want to look into that
We've
later?
considered impervious pavers. I mean, I think that we need to work with our architect and contractor to figure out what that's going to look like. But we have absolutely, you know, the plan is to redo the whole driveway, so it will at least be continuous. And like I said, the surrounding sidewalks as well, and curbs. I mean, I have 3 children, one of whom goes to school in Weston. I have to say, we're a family of 5. You'll note that most of the houses on this side of the street park many cars, many more cars in their driveway than we do. So I wish that the T were something that were more available to us. It unfortunately is not. So the parking feels like quite a necessity for a family.
Okay, thank you for now. There may still be other questions for you. We appreciate your availability. Councilor Lobovitz.
So I have a question. First of all, I support the pervious pavement. But I do have a question about the size. We visited the property today, and in front of the house there are some stone brick-like bricks that come out, I'm not sure, 1.5 feet, 2 feet. And then there are a few small plants between those stones and the house itself. I guess it's the porch structure. I'm not sure how the 19 feet is being measured. Does it include all the way up to the porch? Because there is no parking in that area because of the plantings and all. And then the car that I saw in the driveway was quite a large, I guess it's an SUV, I'm not sure. But it was pulled up pretty far up to the house. And the back of the car, the rear of the vehicle, was just at the sidewalk, where the sidewalk meets the property. I guess that's the frontage of the property. So I have questions about the size and how that was measured, and I also would like some comments about the vehicle being right at the border of the sidewalk. In terms of a safety factor, how do we typically look at these kinds of situations? Because, you know, I'm relatively new, and we have had issues like this before where we didn't accept it for safety reasons, and I'm just raising that. So these are questions. I'm not saying I'm opposed to the project. I understand the necessity for this because of the nature of the property and the age of the home and all that. And I also did notice that the home next door also had, as a petitioner mentioned, cars in the front. So I don't think that's an issue in terms of the neighborhood. As was pointed out, there were several homes that have the same issue. So I don't think that per se is an issue. But I do have those questions, and I wondered if somebody could help me answer them.
Thank you, Councilor Lobovitz. I think what might make sense is to first go back to Joe Iadonisi, because I thought I heard him explain the answer to your first question about measurement and dimensions. Joe, can you answer that question about where that 19 and 19.7 foot measurement in terms of the depth or length of the driveway comes from? Is it to the house or to the porch or to the end of where they're parked currently? And then we will go back to Ms. Kandel to talk about how she parks that big car. Joe, can you answer the dimensioning question?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the 19.7 feet for the driveway length would be measured from the front lot line to the, it's kind of the corner of the porch that's closest to the front lot line. So if there are any structures in between that corner of the porch and the parking area, then those would be things that I would flag if I were the planner going out and conducting the the final inspection in advance of the certificate of occupancy to say that this does not look like the plans. But it would have to be a structure. Any sort of potted plants or things like that, I might bring to the owner's attention that that's not necessarily safe and not a good idea. But within my purview, I would say that that is something that most likely the inspectors from inspectional services would catch before it even got to me. But that would be how I would view anything there on the driveway. But otherwise, there's no requirement for any sort of a parking stall in this arrangement where it's side by side to be any longer than 19 feet, regardless of what type of vehicles the owners have. As they may sell vehicles, they may sell their property, but the special permit will stay with the property. So we would keep that same 19 feet in perpetuity. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. That's what I heard you say, and I just wanted us to be clear on that. So now, Ms. Candell, from what I understand from Councilor Lobovitz, you have some pots or some other paving materials between the porch and where you're parking now?
There's just a few rose bushes that have been there since we purchased the home. The plantings have always been there. I suppose we could remove those. I don't know that they would actually gain us much at all. I do understand we try and pull the car up as far as we can. Again, I am a mother of 3 kids with lots of sports equipment, and we need a car to get around. So I would also add that there are other very large vehicles in the neighborhood in these condensed spaces. It's just, I'm not quite sure how to address the question of the size of my vehicle, given that it feels like a necessity for our family. We've not, to my knowledge, had any problems. We try to be very conscientious of parking the vehicle as close to the house as we can. The porch would be something we cannot. I think the porch is it's original to this very old house, which we've tried to take great care to keep in good condition. We could certainly talk with an architect about removing the plantings if that's what was needed.
Thank you again for your availability for these questions. I think our concern will be around, this is speaking for myself at least, that there's enough room to park your vehicles that you're not overhanging the sidewalk in any way, not impeding the potential move.
We've been here since 2020 and never once has anybody complained to us, neighbors or otherwise, that we're impeding the sidewalk. I'll just say that. I don't know, how else to phrase it.
You just technically can't overhang the sidewalk. So thank you. President Laredo.
So I'll start by saying I fully support this. I think this is exactly what the special permit process is designed to do. We have a rule in place, it's a good rule, but we make exceptions to those rules when conditions on the ground change. That's what we have here. So I have no qualms with this at all. My one, it's great that they're gonna put in pervious pavers, it's wonderful. I appreciate that. I also think that we ought to be cognizant of the fact that this is not some large scale or even a small scale developer where I think it's quite appropriate to say and put restrictions on for someone who's doing work where they hope to turn a substantial profit, but rather, one of the many types of homeowners we have in the city who are just seeking to do a basic improvement to their project. My one caveat, though, is that we have the size of a parking stall in place for a reason. And that reason is to really to promote safety along sidewalks. We don't want vehicles sticking out to on the sidewalk. That does create an issue. So I want some assurance, whether it's from the planning department tonight or inspectional services, that in fact there's enough space to park a vehicle within the rules, 19 feet. And that's the test. I would never ask this petitioner to move their porch to create an extra foot or two. I think that would be plain silly. But there does need to be enough space to meet our requirements. And it's not a question, to be clear, of whether this homeowner is going to do her best to not park into the sidewalk. I have no doubt that this homeowner is going to do the right thing, but we always write these orders with the view that it's not just for this homeowner, but it's in perpetuity. That's my only comment. If I have assurance from the planning department that during the inspection of this property, they're going to measure it so there actually is the requisite 19 feet, I think that alleviates our concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Laredo. I'm just going to quickly chime in that I am known for being really picky about the size of parking spots, parking areas. I'm a landscape architect by profession and site planner. 19 feet deep by 9 feet wide would be perfect and fine if, as President Laredo says, we can guarantee that that will be the size of each spot. That's adequate. That would be fine with me. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Councilor Laredo and Larry on their support for this project and their comments. The only thing that I want to add is, Ms. Candell, if you just look at your neighbors next door at 25 Chase Street, they have permeable pavers for their driveway. I would try to mimic something like what they have on their property. And you do that and you'll be fine. Thanks.
Thank you. I had one other hand up. Should we come back? Oh, let's go to Councilor Farrell, had his hand up, then I'll come back to you, President Laredo.
Thank you, Chair. This is very quick. Also, I am in agreement with this request, and I hope you are able to keep your rose bushes. I'm just curious to know that in your planning to redo this, will it include that side path that goes up to the back porch? And if so, is it your plan to cover the entire surface with the same pervious materials? I know we're only looking at the parking space, but just it would be nice if the entire surface, if you're going to change it, would be that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, the plan is to do that walkway area as well, and for all of the material to be consistent. And again, we are very interested in doing impervious, as you all know, that is also a cost, an additional cost, which we hope we can bear. But yeah, the goal is to beautify it and to make it more consistent and to make it better for the environment. Right now, it's a mess that we've been living with for longer than we would like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All set. Councilor Laredo.
I'm just going to add that in order to alleviate any concerns about the size, we don't have to do it right here and now, but I would suggest that planning with the law department make it quite clear that there needs to be some kind of, that needs to be unobstructed so the vehicle can actually utilize the 19 feet that's required. But otherwise, I really would like to get this approved.
Yes.
Thank you.
I agree, and I think we're ready to move on with that, and I agree with everything you said. And I'll just say quickly to Ms. Candell, I was initially disinclined to want to like this because we often don't like parking in the front setback, but having heard of all of our criteria, there are really no other options for you. There is context in your neighborhood of many other homes, particularly on your side of the street, doing that. So I like many of my colleagues, I believe I will be voting in favor of this. I agree that it should be pervious. I think we can handle that at a later date with approval through planning, and the size of the parking stalls needs to be, as we say, set in stone. Councilor Lobovitz, would you like to make a motion?
Move to close the public hearing.
So moved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is anyone opposed to closing the public hearing? No. And another motion?
I move to accept the applicant's, the petitioner's request for a special permit with the proviso as described by President Laredo. Thank you. And I'm doing this with pleasure. I think it will enhance the home and the ease of use for the family. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just be clear that the provisos are around the pervious surface and confirmation of the size of the parking stalls to be determined by planning and ISD before completion. Let us see, is there a council order, Mr. Iadinisi?
The proposed findings are that the specific site is an appropriate location for the second parking stall in the front setback, as the dwelling is set back less than 20 feet from the front property line, providing insufficient room to create parking stalls elsewhere on site. Secondly, that the proposed second parking stall in the front setback as developed and operated will not adversely affect the neighborhood because other properties in the neighborhood have similar parking configurations. Next, that there will be no nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians created by the creation of a second parking stall in the front setback, as no additional curb cut is being created and the proposed parking stall will not block the sidewalk. Next, that access to the site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved with the creation of a second parking stall in the front setback, where there had been one non-conforming parking stall in the front setback because access to the site is unchanged. Next, that the extension of the non-conforming parking configuration that places a parking stall within 5 feet of the street shall not be substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming use to the neighborhood because the parking configuration currently exists. And lastly, that literal compliance with the number of parking stalls in the front setback is impracticable due to the nature of the use or the location, size, width, depth, shape, or grade of the lot, or that such exceptions would be in the public interest or in the interest of safety or protection of environmental features. Specifically, compliance by way of creating additional parking elsewhere is impractical due to the grade of the lot, with Chase Street at a higher elevation than Breland Ave to the north, as well as the dwelling's placement on the lot. Next, the proposed conditions are the standard conditions minus architectural plans, as no changes to the architectural features of the building are proposed.
Joe, can you then add into those conditions the items that we talked about here in terms of pervious paving material and maintenance of the 19 by 9 minimum stall sizes for the 2 parking spots?
Understood. Yeah, I'll work with law and others in the planning department to make sure that is well crafted.
Thanks, and I'm confused on one point. Could you back up to the slide of findings? This will be quick, I think.
There was a typo in the 5th one that is within 5 feet of the street. If that's what
Good.
you caught
That
there,
is what
it's
I'm
within
looking
5
at,
feet of the
yes.
front lot line. My
Okay,
apologies.
Good, I'm like, phew, we don't really want a parking spot within 5 feet. Okay, thank you for calling that out. That caused me a little moment of consternation. Okay, I think we're ready to take a vote.
Counselor Block,
Aye.
Counselor Farrell,
Aye.
Counselor Kelly,
Aye.
Counselor Leary,
Aye.
Counselor Lovovitz, Counselor Lucas,
Aye.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Good luck. We all look forward to seeing how much more beautiful this will look next spring.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Our next item is number 363-24, request to allow parking in the front setback within 5 feet of the front lot line at 140 Derby Street. Planning?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Katie Wewell. I have this one. Some aspects of this petition may sound familiar. Let's see. So we have special permit 363-24 at 140 Derby Street. This is a special permit to allow parking in the front setback and within 5 feet of the front lot line at 140 Derby Street. So the petitioner is seeking to convert their existing attached garage to habitable space, and they are seeking to locate the second required parking stall per the zoning in the existing driveway. This requires relief to allow a second parking stall in the front setback where 1 per dwelling unit is allowed, and to further extend non-conforming parking to allow an additional parking stall within 5 feet of the front lot line. So same exact relief as the last one. When reviewing this request, the council should consider whether the site is an appropriate location for this proposed parking configuration, whether it will adversely affect the neighborhood, whether it will create a nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians, whether access to the site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved, whether literal compliance with the city's parking regulations, which limit single family homes to only one parking stall in the front setback, is impracticable, and whether the proposed extension of the non-conforming parking within 5 feet of the front lot line is not substantially more detrimental than the existing parking. So the site is located in a single residence 3 zoning district. The property is located across from the Franklin School. So due to that, there's not as many single family home properties to look to for context. We just have that southern side of Derby Street. But however, properties further east on Derby Street do have similar side-by-side parking configurations. And properties further west actually have driveways that lead to parking behind a dwelling, but at a lower grade. So the site has several existing nonconformities that make it challenging to locate parking elsewhere on site. The lot size of 5,000 square feet, where 7,000 is required. The site has a nonconforming front setback of 21.4 feet, where 25 feet is required. And also a nonconforming frontage of 50 feet, where 70 feet is required. Also presenting a challenge is the 8-foot grade change from the front of the lot to the rear of the lot. That's a downward slope from the front lot line to the rear lot line. As well as the side setbacks that are between 7 and 9 feet on each side. So the driveway dimensions of 23.1 feet long by 19.2 feet wide demonstrate the ability to park 2 9 by 19 foot parking stalls at the front of the property with the requested relief. Due to the driveway length of 23.1 feet, this places the parking stalls within 5 feet of the front lot line, which requires additional relief. However, the existing driveway and parking is already within 5 feet of the street and is a non-conforming aspect of the site. For these reasons, planning was unconcerned with this relief as it reflects existing conditions of the site, and to locate parking elsewhere would be challenging due to the nonconformities and the placement of the single-family dwelling on the site. So that concludes the planning presentation. We are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wewell. Is somebody here from the petitioner who would like to add anything to that planning summary? Someone, for instance, from Derby Holdings?
Yes. I thought the presentation was very thorough and complete.
Could you just give us your name and address?
Sure, Joseph Amorisino, and the owner of the property at 140 Derby. And I'm happy to answer any questions. The presentation is pretty spot on. If I can clear anything up, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We like it like that. We like that you're here to answer questions and that you can, if you have something interesting to add or a correction, that's helpful. So thank you very much for being here. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment or ask questions? Yeah, I can't say we like that better, but I don't see anyone. So let's take it into the committee. Someone just had a hand up. Councilor Lobovitz, and then Laredo.
So I just had a sort of technical question about one of the conditions. Said if it's impracticable. Well, it's impractical because they're converting the garage to a living space, as I understand it. So how do we deal with a situation like that? It's just a question, not an objection yet to the proposal. And then we did visit the property again today, and I believe we noticed that, or I noticed that the curb cut is not as wide as the request for the width that the driveway, the two stalls, would have. I think that's the case, but again, we could look at that, and the question is whether that curb cut should be widened to accommodate the two stalls. So that's, those are my two questions, actually. They're just questions.
Do you know how wide your curb cut is in order to fit two cars? No? Is there a plan that shows that?
It should be on the existing, if it may be on there right now. The curb cut is pretty wide, though. While it may be inside where you're speaking, it is wide. It's not a single car curb cut by any means.
Ms. Wewell, can you pull that plan up for us while we're talking about it so we can look at that?
Right, so I showed the proposed conditions. You can see the existing of the site underneath the proposed, but they did submit an existing conditions plan. So I'm just going to pull that one up because
Thanks.
it might be.
Especially if it's dimensioned.
It is not. I can share and let's see. This is it. Okay.
So 18 feet wide for a driveway would be wide, but on the other hand, that's how much width you'd need to park two cars heading in.
That would be my question, whether the curb cut has to conform with the width of the proposed parking stalls. It's, again, just a question, that's all.
Yeah, so curb cuts aren't a zoning in the zoning ordinance. They fall under engineering's jurisdiction. I think if this needed to be widened, it would probably be permissible, but it looks, it looks a little bit more narrow than the 19.2 foot wide driveway, but unfortunately it's not dimensioned.
But the plan you have up is proposed and it's showing.
No,
oh,
it's
okay.
existing.
And my other question about the impracticability of having another stall because of a change in the use of the garage. Again, just a question. I'm just trying to understand what's going on here and the rules that apply.
Ms. Wewell, perhaps you would like to do a brief definition of how planning interprets impracticable, because I don't believe it's about the use. I think it's about site limitations.
Right. I think the question is it appropriate to have the additional parking stall there? I think we don't really look at the reason as much as to why they need it, because that doesn't really fall under zoning. But I would also defer probably to Attorney Temple to see if he has anything to add on this question.
Mr. Temple?
Yeah, I don't have any specific guidance for the committee here. The specific language in the zoning ordinance says impracticable due to the nature of the use or the location, size, width, depth, shape, or grade of the lot. So it's not solely about its relationship to the lot and the and issues with the lot. It can also be related to the use.
Which is what Councilor Lobovitz was, I think, getting at. Like, is the change of use of the garage from a garage space to livable space what makes it impracticable, bad pronunciation, and thus more legitimizing this? Is that, did I say what you're questioning about it appropriately?
Again, this is a decision to convert the garage, which then makes it impracticable, but that's assuming we're okay with the conversion of the garage that then would cause a need for this. It's just a very small, I think it's a small technical issue. I'm just trying to get some clarity on it. I think we can, I think I'm happy with, or not, with the answer that we got. It seems rather vague to me anyway, but I'm happy to leave it at that.
Okay, however, the owner who's standing there has his hand raised, so I'd like to give him a chance to address this.
So you pretty much nailed it when you said small technical issue. When you go for the building permit to convert the garage, when you had the garage, you had 2 parking spots, which you need to have. One in the garage, one in the driveway. When you convert the garage, you now need 2 again. So that's the relationship between converting the garage and then having 2 spots in the driveway. I'd also add that you'd have to have a Model T Ford to fit into the existing garage. So I think we're in a position to improve things a bit here.
I don't want my question to appear as if I'm not sympathetic to what you're trying to accomplish. It's really for my own edification as a committee member. That's please understand it in that context.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think you
Thank
did
you.
actually answer that. I just have a quick question. You're the owner, Joseph. The owner is listed here as Derby Holdings. Is this a company, an LLC, that's purchased the home for resale, or do you live there?
I rent the property, and I own the LLC that owns the real estate. I just hold the real estate in the LLC like a lot of people do.
It's not really that relevant for us.
I'm happy to answer any of the questions.
I'm seeing a difference between a human being with a first and last name and an LLC listed, just trying to get clarification. Okay, Councilor Lobovitz, are you set for now?
Yes.
Thank you. President Laredo.
So this is an easy one for me. I think this is a quite appropriate project. We want people to be able to take a garage, particularly we have lots of garages in the city that were built for a different era that really don't function. We have lots of garages where people manage to put all their stuff in and therefore have no room for parking too. You know, this is a pre-existing condition, essentially. They park in the front. We have no control really over curb cuts, it seems to me. And I have zero concern about the size of curb cuts when we're dealing with a single-family residential property. It's very different if we have a large commercial property along Needham Street, for example, where multiple curb cuts create real issues. But along a sidewalk on a residential street where you're going to have 2 cars leave at, you know, maybe twice a day, I just don't see it as an issue. And owning property in an LLC is usually considered a wise legal position to reduce your liability rather than holding title directly in your name or even a realty trust, which is generally disfavored these days.
It's really not
Thank
our
you.
business. I just was curious. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. I think this project is fine. I'm looking at the curb cut and driveway right now on Google Maps. The curb cut is wide enough to fit in 2 cars. The driveway is wide enough to hold 2 cars and long enough to hold 2 cars. That's why you're here, and I'll vote in favor. And I know this is Ward 3, so I can move this for you if you want.
Thank you. I will have a few words about it, but I appreciate you doing that for me. Councilor Block.
Well, just to beat the curb cut into the ground one more time, when we visited this, it did look pretty clear that the width of the driveway was wider than the width of the curb cut, that the proposed driveway. We watched lots of children walking in front of this house today, as they do every day. And it isn't that a wider curb cut would be an enhanced safety factor, a detriment. It would actually improve the safety so that cars aren't inadvertently having to jump over the curb in order to get into the parking space on the right. I think that's sort of how I looked at this. This may not be under our jurisdiction. So be it. But it did seem like it needed to be dealt with to assure that cars were going to be safely able to enter and exit this second requested space. And I don't know if that's exactly how you were thinking about it, but that's how I looked at it. So I will be voting in favor of this project. This is not a reason to deny it, but I do think it's something that the petitioner and whoever else planning should examine.
I'm sure that, I assume that the owner or petitioner wants this to work well for the potential use of getting the cars in and out of the driveway. And between that and engineering that will be the ones looking at dimensions and curb cuts and all, I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to raise that. Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also have no problems with this project. I'd like to see another living unit in a city where we desperately need places for people to live, especially smaller spaces. Mr. Amorosino, since you are here, I was just going to ask you, are you making any changes to the driveway at all? It looks like it's already big enough for 2 spaces.
It's done, yeah.
It's all done?
As is right now. We're not making any further changes. We have the width and the length as is.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll give you no suggestions.
Maybe after the meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, Councilor Leary. I live nearby too. I live in the Franklin School District and also have gone by, as most of us do, site visits. It's a really important part of our job here. One of the things I like about it, besides what Councilor Leary just said about maintaining, and Councilor Laredo, President Laredo too, about maintaining housing stock, it's going to basically look exactly the same. You're not changing the footprint. I assume you'll take off the garage doors. In fact, it might look more appealing. The driveway will be used the same. Even though you have a garage that can fit a Model T, probably there are sometimes 2 cars parked there right now anyway. So things will change very little. You've just come before us to do basically a legal process. And I too will be voting in favor. And I'm happy to have Councilor Lucas, my nearby abutting ward councilor, make the motion because it's my ward, and when it's your ward, you don't usually make the motion when you're chairing a committee.
Yeah,
Councilor Lucas.
So I move we close the public hearing and move for approval.
Thank you. Let's do a voice vote on the closing the public hearing. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is anyone opposed? We do have a motion to approve, so let's take a look at the findings in council order.
Yes, thank you. So for the findings that I read aloud earlier, we planning points to similar properties further east that have that side-by-side parking configuration, and similar situations further east on Derby Street. We point to that the driveway already exists in the current configuration. Nothing is really changing than taking that space out of the garage and putting it in the driveway. And we, with the parking condition with literal compliance, we state that, locating parking elsewhere is challenging due to the topography of the site and the placement of the single-family dwelling and the corresponding setbacks. And then, again, the driveway is not changing. So that is what we use for the findings, the justifications, and then the conditions are standard, the plan referencing, standard building permit, which would exercise the special permit, and then closing out with occupancy, that building permit.
Thank you, Ms. Wewell. Unless there are any further clarification questions, we're ready to vote.
Counselor Block?
Aye.
Counselor Farrell?
Aye.
Counselor Kelly?
Aye.
Counselor Leary?
Aye.
Counselor Lobovitz?
Aye.
Counselor Lucas?
Aye.
Counselor Laredo?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Moving right along, the next item is number 361-24, request to allow a dormer exceeding 50% of the wall plane below at 67 Chester Street. We'll hear first from planning.
Good evening, Joe O'Donoghue from Planning. I will be covering this one. The relief is just for that one item, which is a combination of dormers exceeding 50% of the length of the wall below. There are 4 criteria to consider, which are just the standard criteria: whether or not the site is an appropriate location, whether or not the proposal as developed and operated will adversely affect the neighborhood, whether it will create a nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians, and lastly, whether or not access to site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved. This is a look at the property location. It is in Newton Highlands. What's important to point out about this location is just that it is in an area that was mostly developed in the 1800s and early 1900s, with structures including this one mostly popping up on smaller lots prior to the current zoning ordinance. This particular property is in single residence 2 and is on a 10,200 square foot lot, but for the purposes of the dormer, does not matter as far as which zone or what the size of the lot is. This is a look at the existing and proposed. As far as any work that they're doing, they're going to do some renovations, but none of the other work that they have proposed will exacerbate any nonconformities that they have or require any new relief. The proposed dormer is at the rear portion of the right side of the house. This is a look from the rear where you can see on the top left where that dormer location is going to be and some other by right work that they're going to do. The total length of the wall from one end to the other is a total of 46.5 feet. And the proposed dormer is 21.5 feet. So with that, it is less than half of the length of the wall below. However, this gable end to the left of the proposed dormer does count as a dormer because it does not meet the top of the roof line. And that length is, I misread. It's 21.5 feet for the gable that qualifies as a dormer. It is 15.7 feet for the actual proposed dormer. With that, I think it's just worth pointing out from the elevations that this is a fairly irregular roof line for this dwelling with a peak in the middle. It has the gable end at the front of the house, and then the gable on the side, and another, or at the front, another gable on the rear, and then another gable on the left side, with different height of roof lines to the rear versus the front. So it's a fairly irregular, and the outline of the dwelling is broken up. So with this proposed dormer, that is not necessarily going to have the appearance of one long dormer that is utilized to essentially create a structure that looks like just 3 straight floors. And additionally, there is an additional section of the zoning ordinance which prohibits a certain amount of space above 7 feet from being established above the second story. And once you have enough space over 7 feet, then that counts as a third story. However, with the proposal, this does not count as a third story and likely will not result in the appearance of a third story either. So I will turn it back to the committee.
Thank you very much. Is the petitioner here to add any comments, correct any facts that were wrong, or make any statements? For instance, Nancy Bauer or Mark Richard? Or an architect or someone? Oh, well, come forward if you're speaking on their behalf.
Yeah, I think Nancy and Mark are probably...
Make sure the microphone is on and speak closely to it.
Okay. Yeah, Robert Fizek. I'm the architect. I'm also a neighbor. I live at 47 Forest Street, just around the corner. Actually, I worked with Nancy on a previous very large project, rehabbing the entire house in 2020. And in 2012, this house was awarded the Historic House, I guess, of the Year by Newton Historic. So very sensitive to not breaking that, I guess, award by doing anything silly or stupid. And this was a relatively small addition where you actually cannot see the dormer very well at all from the street because of the intervening gable. A little story about the gable as it relates to the dormer rule. That turned out to be a surprise because when I had gone to inspectional services, which I always do before proceeding to final documents, they had considered that that was not a part of the dormer regulation. And only later, in presenting the drawings for permitting, was it determined that, oh no, we count this gable, this side gable, as a dormer from bottom of triangle to bottom of triangle. So I would love to have the opportunity to work with ISD to maybe clarify their interpretations and put them on, have those interpretations on record so that these sorts of things don't happen. But otherwise, hope that you can see that we went to a couple of additional measures that aren't required to make sure that the end of the dormer is actually further in than the 3 feet minimum required, that I took the side wall of the dormer and recessed it further back from the side wall of the home. And therefore, I think we took all good reasonable measures to make it as de minimis as possible. And I will certainly, I'll answer any questions you like.
Thank you, Mr. Fezek. We're glad you're here, and we'll call you back up. You can have a seat if you'd like. We'll call you back up if there are any questions for you. Are there any members of the public who have comments about this? Oh, by the way, I need to welcome Councilor Pam Wright, and I believe Julia Maliki joined us too. And Councilor John Oliver are with us, all on Zoom tonight. Councilor Wright, is your hand up to speak on this project?
Yes, I just want to address the dormer issue that came up in ZAP this week, and we are going to address it. And if Mr. Fezek can put his ideas together, because I don't think we were thinking about the other peak that's part of this house that might get still caught into the rules, but we are trying to fix that so that ISD can make the interpretation that we would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wright. I couldn't tell from talking with planning earlier that it was confusing. You know, what counted it. The facade of the house has a lot going on and windows that are all offset, and so adding a shed dormer when you got gable ones, there's a lot going on in this house, and having clarification about the rules around dormers would be very helpful. Let's see if anyone else would like to speak. I don't see anyone. If you're there and you want to, just raise your hand. In the meantime, let's take this into the committee and see if committee members have questions and comments on it. Councilor Lobovitz.
As the counselor from Ward 6, very happy about this project, and I will be voting in favor of it when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, or shall we move to a motion? Or use your hand up, Councilor Leary? Yes.
I'll just say it seems like a lovely project. It's a beautiful home, and I'm happy that Mr. Fezek has done such a nice job to preserve it. So I will be voting for this.
Yeah, I like a funky house myself that's beautifully done, so I appreciate it also. Anyone else? No? Great. Let's, Councilor Lobovitz, are you going to make a motion?
Move to close the public hearing.
All in favor? Say aye. No one is opposed. Next.
I move to approve this special permit request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lobovitz. Let's hear the findings and conditions.
The proposed findings are that the site is an appropriate location for the addition of a combination of dormers exceeding 50% of the length of the wall below, as a majority of the existing dormer is gabled, so the resulting appearance will not appear as those more than 50% of the right facade. above the second floor is dormer. Second, that the combination of dormers exceeding 50% of the length of the wall below as developed and operated will not adversely affect the neighborhood, as the proposed project will preserve the appearance of the existing dwelling, with the exception of the addition of a 12-foot dormer to the right facade. Third, that there will be no nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians created by the proposed combination of dormers exceeding 50% of the length of the wall below, as the proposed addition will not require any changes to parking or circulation on or around the site. And lastly, that access to the site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved with the creation of a combination of dormers exceeding 50% of the length of the wall below, as the site has sufficient driveway area and parking stalls. Next are the conditions, which are just the standard conditions.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands up, so we can take a vote on this.
Counselor Block?
Aye.
Counselor Farrell?
With compliments and pleasure, aye.
Counselor Kelly?
Aye.
Counselor Leary?
Aye.
Counselor Lobovitz?
Aye.
Counselor Lucas?
Aye.
Counselor Laredo?
Aye.
Motion passes.
There we go, another unanimous one. Thank you for coming. Next is number 298-24, which is a request to allow 3 attached single-family dwellings in 2 buildings and associated parking waivers at 56 Chapel Street. We will hear from planning first.
Good evening, Joe O'Donoghue from Planning, and I'll be covering this as well. This petition was initially heard in the public hearing open on August 27th, and we are back here tonight to consider it again. And it is proposed the construction of 3 single-family attached dwellings across 2 buildings. For tonight, I will be focusing my presentation on the changes from the existing plans as a result of that public hearing and other feedback that the developer and the petitioners have considered and incorporated into the new set of plans. There is one change for the zoning relief, and that is with the reduction of overall building coverage on the lot. There is no longer a need for relief for exceeding the maximum lot coverage, as they have gone below the 25% maximum lot coverage required. Overall, the majority of items requiring relief are required for parking, as there are 5 or more stalls, which includes a section that requires things such as maneuvering aisle width and lighting that aren't necessarily required for other residential uses that don't require 6 or more parking stalls, such as this one does. Additionally, the small size of the lot also includes some of those items of relief, and then the use itself. There's no change to the criteria. We have the 4 standard criteria, whether or not the location's appropriate, whether or not the use will adversely affect the neighborhood, create a nuisance or serious hazard, and whether access to the site over streets is appropriate. And lastly, because there is parking relief involved, we have the parking criteria, which asks whether literal compliance is practical due to the nature of the use, location, size, frontage, depth, shape, or grade of the lot, and that such exceptions would be in the public interest or in the interest of safety or protection of environmental features. This is a look at what the previous plan was on the left, and then what's currently proposed on the right. Overall, they are presenting a reduction of 6% overall in the size in terms of floor area for the 3 units across 2 buildings that they have. The rear setback is changing with a slight reduction. The building in the rear is going to move 1 foot over to the right. And then that building will also move about 2.5 feet over to the right and give more of a side setback, increasing from 7.7 to 10 feet on that left side for that setback. There's no change to the right setback. It is just kind of within rounding, going to stay at 8.1, 8.2, and then 7.8 to 7.7. And then for the front setback, that will be increasing slightly from 25.8 to 26.1. There's also going to be a slight increase in the building separation, with a small area of pavers added in between the landing and the driveway area, separating those parking stalls from the rear building. This is a look at the changes from a schematic perspective, which shows that there isn't a large change in the overall site design. The front building has a little indent in it overall, but otherwise it's just a proportional decrease in the building size without a change to the shape. No changes to parking are proposed, and no changes to the driveway area is also proposed. This is a look at the changes from the front, which shows that the design overall will be staying the same, that they will maintain the appearance overall that they had from the last application. This is a look at the appearance from the rear, where you can see some slight changes with the design as far as some of the outlines of the windows, but that might just be something that is just from a different look at a more detailed elevation. Then next, you can see the slight change to the building in the front with the indent at the rear of the building being created, but otherwise no changes to the right side elevation. Then lastly, no changes to the left either that are discernible at this scale. The overall height is staying within 0.02 inches of the previous height. Landscaping, there are no changes from the previous proposal, which showed the same overall plantings and no addition of any sort of new areas, with that slight increase of space to the left and space in between the driveway and the parking area. That'll be it, and I will turn it over to the committee. I definitely did not want to repeat the entire presentation from the last time, but if you felt like I've left anything out, please feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Iadenisi. I think it was a very clear presentation, which I, for one, appreciate. I believe we have somebody here from the developers side to answer questions or say anything else.
Yes, Madam Chair. Lawrence Lee on behalf of the petitioner, please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. May I share my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't want to waste your time. Joe, as always, did a very, very nice job summarizing, but it has been a couple of months since we last came before you, so I just want to really quickly recap where we are. One of the unique circumstances in this particular petition and location is that we are really right in the middle of a industrial commercial area. So this manufacturing district is right across the street. We are abutting a large parking lot, and we're really the two standalone residential area houses on this side of Chapel Street. Very quick summary in terms of what we've done. As outlined in the planning memo that you have, we did reduce the lot coverage, setback has increased, and just by way of comparison, our FAR is actually lower than the by right FAR. So I think that gives you a sense of the size and massing of the buildings. This is an aerial photograph. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I can always go back to it if you need to. Some streetscapes. Again, this is just a quick tour of the neighborhood as a refresher. This is the rendering. We did meet with our neighbors. We had a neighborhood meeting. We've kept in touch with our folks behind us directly because there is what I'm putting in quotes as retaining walls, which you will see. This facade, by the way, is something that we've changed from our first design to the current one because our neighbors wanted to have a more residential feel to it. You saw these from Joe's presentation, so I'm going to run through those quickly. And then we're going to jump right to the retaining wall that's behind us. So our property is where my cursor is up above. And then below is, this is from the view from Dalby Street. So this is like an 11-foot tall, I'm calling this a wall, but these are old telephone poles that have been stacked up. One of the things that we will be doing is replacing this wall. It is noted in our civil plans that have been submitted as part of the petition. You may have received and seen an email from one of our neighbors in the back. Another of our neighbors in the back, I believe, is on the call tonight, Mark Negrati. I believe he will be speaking, but I'll let him speak for himself. But Mr. Ferrolito did express his support of our project, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let's see if there are members of the public who would like to ask questions or make comments about this. Oh, Mr. Negrati, do you want to speak now?
Yes, I'd like to speak. Hello, folks.
Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mark Negrati, one of the owners of the property abutting the development. I have met with the developer and Mr. Lee several times. We've talked about the wall, and I think the only concern is I expressed to the developer and Mr. Lee is the retaining wall, so-called retaining wall. I think we're about bringing this to closure. There's only one concern now is how the existing wall will marry at the property corner. I believe that would be to the south, how that will be married to the old wall. And I think Albert, the developer, is working with their engineers, and I'm sure they're going to have to go to the building department to submit drawings, stamp drawings, and so forth to the building department. One thing I have to note that I am a civil engineer, professional engineer, registered in Massachusetts. So, Mr. Lee and the developer knows this, and we worked out some concepts or some alternatives, and I think we're almost there. So, I think I'm in favor. I'm not too concerned about the development up on the high side on the property itself. I'm only concerned with the retaining wall.
Thank you, Mr. Negrati. Good to know
Okay,
that you're
thank
a
you.
civil engineer. What is going to be the material of this new wall?
I think they're called shade blocks. And Mark, this is in your area. This is something that we will be weeding out in terms of when we file the building permit details. Once it's fully engineered, Mr. Negrati is correct that we will be making that as part of our building permit application.
Okay, to be determined by competent people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who'd like to be heard on this? I don't see anybody, so we're going to take it into the committee. President Laredo.
Two simple questions for planning that I feel compelled to ask on any project at this point. Are the renderings that we're being shown here true and accurate depictions of what is going to get built?
So what I presented in my presentation were elevations. And with that, there's also an additional scale to the right of that. That is the part that is going to be binding with it, is what those heights are. As far as any sort of design changes or anything like that, if they change up the colors or anything like that, that would be something that would generally be consistent from a staff level, but I'll allow, you know, Ms. Wewall to expand a little bit on any sort of things. Otherwise, any sort of design changes, any sort of enlargement that would exceed the scale shown, that would be something that we would definitely submit for or ask the petitioners to submit for an amendment to the special permit. Other sort of changes that are very small and do not exacerbate the relief or the particular use, those would be things that would go forward for a consistency ruling. But
As you can gather, this question's really not directed at you. No doubt that you've done your work here, but since we have had now a problem on at least one other project with differences between the plans as submitted and the renderings, at least for the foreseeable future, I think I and others will ask the question, are the renderings true and accurate depictions comparable to the plans that you've reviewed, so we have some assurance that we're seeing the same thing?
I can jump in here. I think Councilor Laredo, renderings are different from elevations. So the elevations that Joe referred to do have a scale on them. So we know what the pitch of the roof should be, what those facades will look like in terms of the roof line, the windows, things like that. I don't believe any renderings were shown, which are sort of more visual, that give you a sense of sort of the bulk, but it's not something that we are going to show in the future or reference in any.
So has someone compared the renderings to the plans to make sure they're consistent in terms of elevation?
You might mean elevations, because I hear Ms. Wewell being very specific about the terms of rendering versus elevation.
I'll defer to the chair. I think the chair understands the concern I'm raising here. And I'm sorry that I feel compelled to do it, but I want assurance, because I'm not an expert in this field. I want assurance that what we're being showed in the drawings is what we're getting.
President Laredo, I think you speak for all of us when you ask that question, and I think we all appreciate it. And again, I don't want anyone on the planning department to take this personally or as offensive or an insult. We do want to know that what we're looking at is going to be what's presented, and I hope it's not true that renderings will not be shown to us. Renderings I might call perspectives or three-dimensional models, because they're very helpful to understand it. I understand that they're often not to scale, and planning would like to not consider them and include them in the packet. I, for one, would urge you not to do that, and you can make a distinction in the terminology and call a rendering and an elevation an elevation. What we're asking for is to know that what we're looking at is what we're going to get. And again, nothing personal to planning, but it's a very valid question, and you will probably be hearing it on many other projects as we go forward. So I appreciate Katie and Joe trying to take a stab at it, but this is something that will continue to come up with us. Are you all set, President Laredo?
One other question, is there any grade change associated with this project?
My understanding is the site is relatively flat. And I see Attorney Lee shaking his head, yes.
So there's no grade change, correct?
No significant grade change.
No, none that requires a retaining wall, which I think is the source of the concerns for this council and understanding the project in question that's causing all of this. There is a retaining wall in the back of the property that I showed. That will be replaced and engineered. Other than that, we're talking about very minor changes for drainage and flow, that type of stuff.
By minor, you mean, say, less than a foot?
That's correct. That's
All
correct.
right.
There are elevations and grades right on the plans.
I
and the
don't think
civil-
any of us are interested in changing 3 inches of grade one way or the other, but we want to know there's something significant. Thank you very much. And I do want to be emphasize what our chair said. This is not meant to be an issue for anybody personally, but we have institutional issues here that have now been raised that we need to grapple with. Thank you.
Some amount of grading is almost always necessary to be sure that surface water is running off or draining properly. So I think asking for no grade change is a pretty unrealistic thing. Asking for, if it's under a foot, we know that that's just very minimal and for grading and drainage purposes. So thank you, Mr. Lee, for answering that. All set, President Laredo, with your questions? Okay. Councilor Lucas, and then Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lee, thank you and your client for making the changes to the site from before. In summary, the changes that I had requested was to move the building closer to the parking lot side and further away from the residential neighbor to the left. You have done that. Your lot coverage was over before. Now it is conforming. That is good to see, so thank you. Your open space was barely conforming last time. I mean, barely. It was 50.4. What is it right now?
51.8.
51.8.
51.6. I'm sorry, 51.6.
51.6. Okay, so that's still conforming.
Correct.
Your side setback to the left went from 7 feet to 10 feet. That requires relief, as does the other side setback. Question to you or to planning, if you know, because I can never remember this stuff. What is the side setback in the MR zone if it's a two-family by right?
It is a 7.5 feet for an old lot, 10 feet for a new lot.
Okay, is this an old lot or a new lot?
This is an old lot.
So that would be what?
7.5.
7.5, and you're at 10. Okay.
Correct.
And also, I want to point out that the home to the left is in the front of the lot, and you are building in to the setback in the rear of the lot, correct?
Oh, you mean the new building?
The new building is building into the setback, but it's in the rear of the lot, correct?
If I'm understanding so you're on the front building.
No, no.
Sorry.
Let me start over. You're
Okay.
building into the setback, the side setback, but it's the rear building. And the building to the left, your neighbor, their home is in the front of the lot, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so basically what I'm getting is that the two buildings, the building in the rear, your building, and the neighbor's building next door, they're not next to one another.
I see what you're saying. Let me see if I can find a picture of that. I believe the landscape plan may show that. If I may share my screen, I can illustrate that one picture.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So, yep, the existing building is over here where my cursor is on the left, if you can see the screen.
Yep.
And we pulled it away from them as much as we can.
Yep. Okay, thanks. And to the parking lot side, I presume you have some sort of a fence, right?
Yes, that is correct. So let me just double check. I believe we have a 6-foot tall privacy fence that's being proposed.
Privacy fence, good. Any landscaping on that side of the house, or is it just a fence?
There is, I apologize, let me pull the screen back up.
Oh, you can keep
so
it
you can
up.
see it. So there is some landscaping to hide, to shield some of the parking spaces on this side. Otherwise, we want to have some usable open space for the folks.
Okay.
Grass areas.
And then the last thing I was going to say was, let me see if I can find it. Your building height, if I can find it, you're at 34.7 feet and around 33.1 feet. You said you're changing the grade, but by no more than 1 foot, right?
It's approximately a foot.
Okay.
So I see a couple of grades on the civil plans here with 47 and 48 measurements, and which looks about to be the same. So we're within that 48, 47 elevation on the ground. And then the just by reference, the first floor elevation is at 50. So it's a 3-foot difference in terms of the grade. That kind of gives you a sense of the height of the building, and that's also shown on the elevations that Joe had mentioned.
So if I'm standing on the sidewalk in front of the house, how high will the building actually be, the tallest point of the building, if I'm standing on the sidewalk? I know your building is at 34.7 feet at its highest point, but if you count in the change of grade, which you said is minimal, where are we going to be at?
So the average grade is 47.88 in the front. Let me just see here. In the back building, it's about it's all within 47 point. It's almost 48.02. And then you have the peak roof elevation at 80.25. So by way of that is a difference of 34, 35 feet, call it 34 and a half. So effectively, it is, and what I'm reading, I think if I can illustrate that for you, is the civil plan, and I'm going to zoom that in really quickly so I can show you what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So let me just share my screen real quick again. Pull up the screen. Okay. It's a little bit hard to read because there's so many numbers and lines. But effectively, this is what I'm looking at. And I apologize. I want to make sure that this, I hope this is the right version. But essentially, what we have is we have about a 48 peak, and then we have the proposed grade, average grade, and we have the elevation of about 82 and a half. So that's what gives the height of the building.
So is that 30 feet? 30 and a half?
34 and a half, 33, rounding up numbers. We're still under the 36-foot maximum. So effectively, we're no different than a by right height of a building.
So you're 34 feet on the top one, and the bottom one is about 33 feet, right?
Correct.
Okay, so basically what I'm trying to get at is that you're under 36 feet.
I'm under 36 feet.
If I was standing on the sidewalk.
That's correct.
Okay, good.
That includes also if you add the change in grade from that sidewalk to the front elevation, but there only being one contour line in between most of where that sidewalk is directly in front of that house. It's likely somewhere around a foot difference in between that existing average grade plane of about 48 versus it being around 47 for where that sidewalk elevation is according to the civil plan.
Mr. Donahue, are you saying the building will be lower than 36 feet if I'm standing on a sidewalk?
It'll add about a foot from where the elevation is, where your feet are standing versus where the elevation is in terms of the average grade plane for the front elevation, where that will be apparent from you from the sidewalk.
Will that be under 36 feet?
Yes, adding a foot, that would be under 36 feet total.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I just wanted to make sure that we were at 36 feet in height from standing on the sidewalk with the change of grade. That is all I have for now, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lucas. Just to let everybody know who's either on Zoom or here in the chamber, I am taking people in the order of which they've raised their hand, and I'm saying this so that Councilor Oliver knows that I've seen his hand up, and I will call on you in the order of which hands are raised. I'm hearing from people first, also who haven't spoken. So the order we're in right now is Leary, Lobovitz, Oliver, and Laredo. Councilor Leary, you're next.
Thank you very much. So this is the street I live on, but the other side of it. So I'm very familiar with this area. My friend, Mr. Nagrati's mother's house. So I'm appreciative that they made those changes and that Councilor Lucas was also involved in that so that Mr. Cappola's garden would get more sun. And I think that's very important to be sensitive to the neighbors. I do love that you're going to be replacing that so-called retaining wall in the back, which looks more like some kind of dam you might see in a river when a lot of logs clump together. And it really does not look very safe. So I think that's one of the really important thing is, and I'd be interested in following what kinds of materials they're using for that and how that would be constructed, just to make sure that it's, you know, the engineering is looking at that. So those are all good things. One thing I want to just, my colleagues have already kind of discussed the height issue, the grade issue. So those are all large concerns. We don't want to be surprised by an overly tall structure, even though you really only have one direct abutter, and you're surrounded by parking lot on both sides and a manufacturing building across the street. I'm trying to recall, I wanted more information on the stormwater system here. And do you require any grade changes for any kind of infrastructure for the stormwater system? Can you speak to that, Mr. Lee?
Sorry, I had to unmute. So I think what I see here is there will be a drainage system. With every special permit, we're required to keep all the water on site. So engineering will definitely have to approve everything we do. To the extent that there are any grade changes, it will be obviously to direct the flow of water. So there will be grade changes for that purpose. As we saw on the site plan, there are very minor height differences between the street level and our front yard, and that gives you a good sense of how flat this lot is. So there'll be very minor changes as it relates to directing the flow of water and drainage within the property.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm happy to hear that the total overall height would be under 36 feet, which is the by right expectation for homes in that area. My other just comment is, is that going to be what kind of fencing are you putting on the side, the privacy fence?
Good question. I may have to look at the landscape plan, but it just says 6-foot privacy fence. I'm not sure if materials may have been selected at this time.
You know how I'm not a fan of those big white plastic fences.
Yep. I assume my client will be particularly speaking with the Cappolas in terms of selecting a type of fence, and I'm sure they'll be open to doing that.
Okay. Are you putting any pervious surfaces along some of the driveway areas?
There are pavers over the exterior parking stalls. So, so to the extent that may be permeable, but otherwise it would just be the open space grassed areas.
Okay. I do think that you're putting a lot of building on a small lot.
Yeah, so one thing that would be helpful is the by right lot coverage is 30%. And so with these types of special permits, the requirement drops down to 25%. Here, with Councilor Lucas's request, we've reduced it to below 25%. So we're just about 24.75. So effectively, we're over 5% less than a by right lot coverage, meaning the structure coverage of the lot. So in totality, if you were to put the two buildings together, glue them together, that is actually a little bit over 5% smaller than a by right building, if that helps.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Leary. Councilor Lobovitz.
So it wasn't clear to me whether Councilor President Laredo's question was actually answered. It seems like it's a yes or no, and I didn't hear either of those words. So I just again, wanted clarification on his question.
His question about is what we're seeing going to be what is built?
Yes.
I think I can answer that, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead,
think
Ms. Wewell.
The confusion earlier was around the terminology that was being used. So never will we reference renderings. Planning is talking about elevations that are included in the architectural plan set. If this project is approved, those will be referenced in the council order. And when the applicant comes in for building permit, that is what will be compared to any building permit application plans. And then, once the project is constructed, if approved, that's what the planner will go out to the site with the sets of architectural plans to compare the elevation. So yes, what is being shown is what the applicant will be held to.
Thank you.
Thank you for being sure that question was answered, and I think the issue of renderings versus plans versus elevations versus perspectives, in my opinion, is something that should be maintained an open question, but that will be put on me to have more conversations with planning about that. Councilor Lobovitz, is that it for you for now? Thank
Yes.
you. Councilor Oliver, thank you for your patience in virtual reality.
No problem, Madam Chair. Thanks for your time. And thank you for the presentations. Super helpful, as always. I attended 2, I believe, community meetings about this project. I'm fairly familiar with it. But I do want to, this is going to be a very technical question that I think both Councilors Leary and Laredo touched on, President Laredo. And I'm kind of curious, just as a quick follow-up, if indeed there is the need to raise the grade by some amount in order to accommodate the stormwater management system on the property, beyond what we're seeing today in the contours, right, that are on the site plan that I've become very adept at looking for all of a sudden, will that come back to the city council, or will that just keep moving forward in the process, as a building permit is requested and so on and so forth? I'm just curious because that question has cropped up over the past few days.
Councilor Oliver, are you asking a general policy question, or are you asking a question that relates to this docket item proposal before us?
It is related to this docket item, but it would have implications. Is that part of the process? Is that what would happen here? Is really what I'm after.
Planning?
I think if the building permit plans came in with alterations to the approved grade, we would probably start with consistency with inspectional services if it were different from what was approved. I think we would, look at whether it impacts the height. If it sort of raises the grade to no longer have the height in compliance, that would be a non-starter. So I think it's something the applicant will need to balance very carefully. But if something comes through at building permit and the grading is altered, I think we would probably be starting with a consistency because planning would also not want to make that call on our own.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that. I do also want to kind of go back to something I heard from Attorney Lee a few minutes ago. And I think the way I want to ask this question, Madam Chair, is I'm currently looking at the zoning review memorandum from October 7. And I'm hearing significantly different numbers in the conversation in the chamber to the numbers that are on this chart on page 3. Specifically, I heard a different number when it came to setbacks a minute ago. And I also heard a difference when it came to, I believe it was the lot coverage figure. What's showing in the table did not match what I was hearing in the chamber. And I believe it was Attorney Lee. I may have that wrong. And I'm just curious, is what's in this file, by the way, is linked to the agenda and it's in NewGov.
I have that document open. I do see the proposed setbacks as 10 feet from the side, 7 feet from the side. Is there?
Yes, yeah, I showed 10 feet and 7.7, but then I believe I just heard, I think it was Councilor Lucas talking about, maybe it was setbacks, the by right setbacks. Is that what I was hearing? Okay, so they're
That's what it was.
significantly different, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so great. The only other thing I heard that was different was the max lot coverage. And I believe I heard that the current proposal, well, the document I'm looking at now shows 24.8% as opposed where 25 is max lot coverage. Are those numbers correct?
That's right.
Okay, so then whatever I was hearing,
I think it may be related to the comparison to the by right number.
it might have been, it could have been. So I'll withdraw that part. But and I'll just wrap up because I know I'm not part of this committee and I know you have a lot to get, or at least one other project to get to tonight. But I do believe that this project, and I think I think I heard Councilor Leary talk about this a little bit. I do believe that this project is a little too busy for this area, despite the fact that it is sandwiched between two fairly large parking lots and across the street from a business park, an office park. All you have to do is look at page 4, in my opinion, of the zoning memorandum. We've got a lot of required relief. A lot of it is required or dedicated or focused on parking and setbacks, restricted end stalls. I'm a little bit concerned really about the reduced maneuvering aisle from 20 feet down to 12. That's a really big difference. I just think that we're putting, this special permit is asking too much of a lot that's under 10,000 square feet. I understand, that the by right option would allow for a lot of massing as well to be built on this property. But I believe it would be far less parking and we would have bigger setbacks. And it does seem to me that regardless of where this parcel is, in terms of where it is within the city, we still have a responsibility here to pay some attention to the zoning that's in place, even if some of those elements are flawed, at least in some of our opinions. And it just seems to me like we're being asked to grant significantly too much relief to fit this project on this lot. But that, I'll leave it at that point. I don't have a vote tonight. If this project remains the way it is, I won't be able to support it when it comes to the full council, but I'll deal with that when it gets there. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Oliver, for coming. We always like to hear from the councilors from the ward, whether they're on the committee or not. You're not a second-class citizen when you speak up here. Councilor Block, are you still having a hand up desire?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. And I do find the continual reference between the proposed plan and the by right option a little distracting from what's there now and the single home that is adjacent to this parcel. And I'm also looking at a zoning review memo. This one is June 24th version. For some reason, I don't seem to have the more recent one. But in this memo, the existing height, I guess, of the current building is 27 feet. Is that right? Either planning or Mr. Lee, am I sort of reading that right?
I don't believe that is correct. I think they were talking about current proposed heights of 33 and 34 feet high, but either Mr. Lee or Ms.
Well, I think
Wewell.
I mean, the proposed height in this is 34.7, 33.1, but the existing height is 27 in this chart that I'm looking at.
That would need to be Mr. Lee or Ms. Wewell or Mr. Iadinisi.
I think it's whoever pulls it up first.
That's correct.
It's a race.
That's
Go for
what
it.
I have on the most recent memo as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't think that number would change. I mean, the proposed, I understand, is changing a little bit. And right now, the two houses look about the same height when I visited them. So this may be within the 36 feet by right. It is within the 36 feet by right, but this is going to change the appearance of those two parcels. I mean, the house on the left, I think, will look significantly smaller than this new house. Is that a fair statement, either planning or Mr. Lee or anybody?
6 feet higher approximately.
Yeah, I guess so. 3 and at least 6 feet higher, yes. Is that, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
if the existing house is 27, the proposed is around 33, 34. So effectively, it would be about that difference, yes.
When you had the rendering of the house showing it at 2.5 stories, I guess, that although the adjacent house was not included in that, it looked pretty substantial. And the kind of architectural impact on a streetscape is just one of those intangibles, I guess, that I keep in mind, in addition to all these metrics. That's my comment for now.
Thank you, Councilor Block. And we're back to President Laredo.
Just a very quick question for the petitioner. The third floor, is that going to be used as a bedroom?
So by building code, it can be used as a bedroom. There are the requisite square footage in terms of the living space that may qualify it as a bedroom. So, but at the moment we labeled it as a playroom because we don't feel like that's going to be used in that regard. But technically speaking, from a building code, yes, it can be used as a bedroom.
And just refresh my memory here, Attorney Lee, does it matter for purposes of FAR whether it's labeled a bedroom or a playroom?
It does not. So it really has to do with the slopes of the roof and the area in which the area that falls under the 7 feet height as well as the 5 foot height. So the 7 foot area has to be 50% or greater than the 5 foot area in the attic as part of the FAR calculation.
I appreciate that refresher. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Lee, let me understand this. Given the criteria for FAR for that third floor, this room, whether it's a playroom or a bedroom, now or in the future, did not count towards the FAR. It's not included in the FAR calculation for the house.
Correct. The use is irrelevant for FAR calculations.
And it wasn't considered no matter what the use,
Correct.
given the configuration and the heights of the ceiling.
Yeah, it's really the structure and how it's built and the size of it. That's what FAR measures, and not what's inside it as being used as.
Okay, thank you. Now we all understand that. Councillor Leary, back to you, Ward 1.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to sort of respond to some of the things I've been hearing from my colleagues, including my colleague in Ward 1, Councillor Oliver. So do we want all our single-family homes to be turned into 3 homes with 5 parking lots? I mean, 5 parking spaces? Because I hear some hesitancy about that. Granted, I do believe that this project is an improvement, not an improvement, but will be an improvement over a by right project. No question in my mind about that. There has been negotiations with the neighbors. We are definitely having some improvements put in there, including that retaining wall. But it's just a question, because we struggle with this all the time in land use. And it brings me back to, we need zoning reform for our residential districts, which is, of course, in ZAP and a larger issue. But that's something that I do struggle with some of these projects. I also understand we need more housing. That's the other thing that I'm cognizant of. And it's better to have housing built closer together. So that's something that I would struggle with, and I just wanted to raise it. It's not just something regarding this project, but as we are looking through this project and the pros and cons and how it fits into the neighborhood and all our concerns about height and density and balancing that with our housing needs, we continue to struggle with it. So that was what I'm thinking about during this conversation. Overall, I will be supporting the project in this case, but I would like to have a larger conversation about zoning and housing and what we really want our city to look like, because this is how it's gonna go going forward. And we have to struggle with all these different things going on. So I will put a motion to close the public hearing when ready, and a motion to approve.
Thank you, Councillor Leary. I'm feeling that we're ready to move on those things. I think we've heard a lot about renderings and elevations and height and drainage and density, and I think we've aired a lot of questions and comments on this, so I would like us to wrap it up. It's after 9 o'clock. We have one more docket item. Not that I'm sweeping anything under the table, but I think we're ready to move on. However, Mr. Lee, I see your hand up one more time.
Yes, I just want to allude to, or sort of remind some of the, or clarify some of the comments. In terms of setbacks, what I heard in terms of comparing by right and what we're proposing here, the by right setbacks would be closer to our neighbors. So effectively, using our dear friends, the Capolas next door, 7.5 feet would be the by right setback, 15 would be the rear, and an average or 25 in the front. So effectively, our current setbacks are actually greater. The building structure is smaller. One of the things that our neighbors, in my many discussions with our neighbors, was that they didn't actually want to have a by right project, because what that would effectively do is force more of a rectangular, long shaped structure. And one of the reasons for the waivers that you see tonight is the fact that we broke up the building into 2 from an aesthetic standpoint, which triggered some of these waiver requirements, ironically. And the parking spaces, because we don't have any garages, what you see in a lot of the table, the number of waivers in the table really pertain to what you would actually see in a parking lot waiver. So if we were to go in for a parking lot like the one that our neighbor right next door to us, lighting requirements, landscaping requirements, maneuvering aisles, all of those things would be applicable for that. Just because the way our ordinance is written for 5 parking spaces or greater, we trigger that. If we had put in, 2 garages, just put 2 more parking spaces within a garage, none of that stuff would be applicable to this project. So I think that may be important to remember as you're considering it.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Actually, it is, and right before I just make a couple of my own comments, which I like to do at the end, I appreciate hearing that, and that part of the configuration and layout of this project is in response to requests and desires of neighbors and abutters, and that I do understand that by right is sometimes a confusing thing to think about. I think it's really helpful to think about all the time what the alternative might be, and here, knowing that you have greater setbacks as a result of not doing a by right project is, I think, an important thing. I'm happy that you have changed the sizes of the units and that the sizes are decreased, and that you've increased the setbacks, that you're going to fix that so-called wall. That open space has increased by a little bit, but still increased and within by right. So I will be voting in favor of this, and I think we are ready to take a vote on the motions that Councilor Leary put on the table. The first one we'll do is whether to close the public hearing or not. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Good. Next, she's got a motion to approve this request, so let's look at the findings and conditions.
Okay, I'll take a moment to pull it up since I had the zoning review memo up instead. The proposed findings are that the site is an appropriate location for the proposed single-family attached dwellings as designed, given the proximity to a wide variety of zoning districts, uses, building types, commerce, and transit. The proposed single-family attached dwellings as designed will not adversely affect the neighborhood, as it is smaller in scale to other buildings in the vicinity and places additional housing near to commerce and transit. Third, that the proposed single-family attached dwellings will not create a nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians, as there is adequate parking on the site and clear lines of sight for vehicles entering and exiting the site. Fourth, that access to the site over streets is appropriate for the types and numbers of vehicles involved in the construction and operation of the single-family attached dwellings, as the relocated driveway results in improved operations of the site. And lastly, that literal compliance with the parking requirements is impracticable due to the nature of the use or the location, size, frontage, depth, shape, or grade of the lot, or that such exceptions would be in the public interest or protection of environmental features. The subject lot is narrow and undersized, and to comply with the standards would result in excess unnecessary paving next to an existing parking lot. Additional paving would be contrary to the city's goals in an area already considered a hotspot in the climate action plan. And the proposed conditions do add landscaping in addition to the site and architectural plans, as well as a stormwater operations and maintenance plan. And we will check on the landscaping at the building permit stage for approval, which will just be to make sure that it is consistent then, and we will get the final landscaping then, as well as consistency at the last stage.
Thank you, Mr. Iadanisi. Before we take a vote, Councilor Lucas?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Iadanisi, do we need a rodent control plan in the conditions?
We can add one, and we can also add the construction management plan as well.
Please, thank you.
Yep.
Will do.
Councilor Block?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that the comments that Councilor Leary mentioned were exactly how I was thinking about this. This is a really close call for me, but I'm going to be joining, voting in favor of this.
These are things we need to be thinking about. So I appreciate the comments and the support for that too from Councilor Block. Alrighty, let's take a vote.
Councilor Block?
Aye.
Councilor Farrow?
Aye.
Councilor Kelly?
Aye.
Councilor Leary?
Aye.
Counselor Lobowitz,
Aye.
Counselor Lucas,
Aye.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. I know none of us like to stay until 10 o'clock. It is almost 9:20 now, and we're not going to shortchange discussion and a full conversation about our final item, which is number 362-24, which is a request to allow 4 single-family attached dwellings to reduce the side setback and to allow a driveway within 10 feet of the side lot line and parking within 20 feet of a boundary line at 51 Oak Ave. Planning?
Yes, thank you. Let me share my screen with the presentation. So I am presenting this on behalf of my colleague Kat Kemet, who is on vacation. We have petition 362-24 at 51 Oak Ave, to allow 4 single-family attached dwellings, and those waivers Councilor Kelly just read aloud. So the petitioner is proposing to construct 4 units in 2 buildings. The project requires relief to allow the building type, to allow reduction in that side setback, and for those 2 parking dimensional waivers for the parking stalls and the driveway. When reviewing the request, the council should consider the 4 special permit criteria for the building type with that reduced side setback, and then as well as the parking criteria for the driveway and parking within the distances prescribed for the boundary. So the property is located on Oak Avenue between Webster Street and Auburndale Avenue. The parcels immediately closest to 51 Oak Ave are zoned multi-residence 1, as well as public use to the rear. And there is a greater diversity of zoning and uses north along River Street and south near the West Newton Village Center. And the West Newton commuter rail station is approximately half a mile from the site, I think even less than that. So this is the existing conditions. You can see that the site is pretty long and narrow, like many other sites in the neighborhood, and has an existing downwards grade change of approximately 13 feet from the front to the rear. And the rear of the site, right about this line here on my cursor, is all beyond that is within the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. So for the purposes of the presentation, I'm only going to focus on the area of the site they are proposing to build on, just for clarity. As you can see, it probably wouldn't be helpful to have the whole lot in scope. So I'm only going to focus on the area of the site they're proposing to build on. 4 units in total are proposed and will be split between 2 buildings with 2 units per building. Building 1 will be located closer to Oak Avenue and building 2 behind it. All work on the site is proposed above that 52-foot contour line, which you can see in red. So that sort of demarcates the site of what is buildable and what is within the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. So the 4 proposed units are broken up, and much of the relief requested sort of reflects the shape of the long, narrow lot to accommodate vehicular access along the southern edge of the parcel. The building is sited 11.3 feet from that northern property line where 25 feet is required. 2 parking stalls on the plans are located between 18 and 19 feet from the side lot line, or from the northern side lot line, requiring relief where 20 feet is required. So it's only these 2 stalls, sort of the frontmost unit of each building. And there is also a retaining wall proposed to the rear of Unit 2. The wall begins with a height of 1 foot along the driveway and makes a right-hand turn behind the rear of the buildings, and it reaches a height of about 3 feet at the turning point, and then it tapers down to 1 foot where it terminates at the northern lot line. Both buildings are proposed at 2.5 stories, with building 1 also consisting of a height of 34.5 feet, and building 2 at 34.8 feet, where 36 feet and 2.5 stories is allowed as of right. So it's within those dimensional standards. The slide shows the front elevation, which will face the neighbors to the left. So remember the shape of the lot, and they're oriented to that left side lot line. The elevation on the right side of the screen is the right elevation and will be the elevation that faces Oak Avenue. In total, the gross floor area for both buildings will be 11,835 square feet. Each unit is approximately 2,650 feet, not including the garage space. While floor area ratio does not apply to single-family attached dwellings, this project would have an FAR of approximately 0.40, where 0.38 is the maximum allowed as of right for a single-family or two-family detached project. And the rear elevation is oriented to the right property line and is the portion of the building that requires relief to be located 11.3 feet from that side property line. Then the elevation on the right side of the screen is oriented to the rear property line. Then, as requested, the petitioner uploaded a landscape plan on October 17th after the issuance of the planning memo. They show screening along the frontage of Oak Avenue with green pillar pin oaks and some shrubs along the side at the front. There are plantings proposed at the front of each unit and mainly bordering the driveway at the interior of the site and along that retaining wall at the rear. So that concludes the planning presentation. We are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wewell. We appreciate that presentation. Now we will hear from the developer's representative. Go ahead, Mr.
Madam
Morris.
Chair, members of the Land Use Committee, for the record, my name is Terry Morris. I'm an attorney with offices at 57 Elm Road, and I'm here representing Mr. Tom Zhu, who is the principal of YZ Fleet LLC. I would, not in deference to the lateness of the hour, but more importantly in deference to the fact that the Planning Department report I find to be quite comprehensive and accurate. So I have no remarks other than to point out one housekeeping item that was pointed out in the memo. I think on page 3 it talks about the by right lot area coverage. This was an issue that came up in the petition right before us. The by right lot coverage is, of course, 30% and not 25% as pointed in the memo. Minor point. More importantly, we want to address the one issue that was pointed out, and that was a decrease in the impervious area. I have spoken to the client in response to the suggestion made by the planning staff, and we're pleased to report that by all of the driveways constitute about 1,026 square feet of the floor area of the site, and we are proposing basically to install pervious areas for all of those 4 driveways and thus reduce the impervious area by close to 20%. Since the increase was about 5,700, it's slightly less than 20% reduction. With that, Madam Chair, I stand here ready to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. I think we all appreciate that you were very brief, but thorough. We don't want to miss anything, and we appreciate the clarifications. I believe there may be some members of the public who would like to speak or ask questions. If so, just raise your virtual hand. Kathy Keel.
Hi, I'm Kathy Keel. I live at 54 Oak Avenue, so across the street from the property under consideration. I am in favor of increased density in Newton, but I have lived here since 1991, and by my very unscientific account, at least, this is the 6th lot on my street of, which has 23 lots, that in that time period has increased the number of units on it. So that's more than 25% of the lots on my street. And if you look up and down the street, there will be more. And I understand that that's what's going to happen. What I am very concerned about, though, is the lack of thoughtfulness about parking and traffic. We live on a 1 block long street, very narrow. When people park on both sides, it's very difficult to get through. Part of the street has no parking because it is the playground. And so anytime that there is any kind of baseball, soccer activities going on, that side, it just gets very, very crowded. And so the more and more housing units that we have on our street, the more and more cars we have. And I understand that there are 2 parking spaces, but they're in tandem, which means that a lot of times people will prefer to park on the street rather than to park in tandem. And it's just getting worse and worse. In addition, every time there's an additional curb cut, so the house next door to me was a single family, is now 2 families. So there's now 2 curb cuts, which means there are less parking spaces available on the street. And so the fact that this has come this far with no parking study and no traffic study concerns me a great deal. And I hope that people in the government at Newton are taking the time to really think through the impact that all of this increased density, which is very consolidated, the impact that it has on people who live here.
Is that it, Ms. Keel?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Some of your comments are things that some of our colleagues here talk about frequently too. If there are no other members of the public, let's take it into committee for some questions. Mark Johnson.
Hi, good evening. I'd like to echo, I'm at 61 Oak Avenue. I'm one of the owners there. I lived there for 3 years straight with my 2 young daughters. And, I echo Kathy's concern just about the congestion of traffic. It is really kind of crazy there. And there's actually a lot of illegal parking that happens when those sporting events come in. And it is kind of scary to have that much parking density in an area where children have their ingress and egress to the park on Oak Avenue. So that's one concern that I have. The second concern I have, and having played with my kids in the backyard of 61 Oak Avenue, and I don't know if we can look at the previous slide deck that showed the contour lines of the property, but it's a wetland back there. And what I've noticed over the past year and a half or so, as the new owners of the property have kind of been tearing things down and cleaning up, taking out a lot of old junk. I mean, it was really an eyesore before, and though it does not look great now, I imagine that anything that would be there in place of what was there before is an improvement to the neighborhood. But that being said, what I've noticed over the past year is a lot more moisture collecting in that wetland area due to what appears to be a pretty significant grade change at the property. So I know that when they plan, they have to plan for, water, but, even as you notice the retaining walls that the, I can't remember who it was describing, that's going to be in the rear of the building area. It goes from 1 foot, then it goes down to like 3 feet, and then back to 1 feet. And so the water just naturally grades to that backyard area. So with the amount and the size of this property being built, the amount of drive that is there, I'm very concerned about water retention on the property, especially as we experience more, wet events, as well as how deep you can actually go when you're in a wetland to get rid of that water for 100-year storms, et cetera. So that's my other concern is that. And I guess one question I had too is, Mr. Kupo, our neighbors, they're probably more directly impacted by the size of this development because their property abuts along the entire lot line. But there is an existing driveway on the other side where the design right now is the back side of the of the buildings, there's an existing driveway there. I'm just curious why the drive has shifted so close to the side lot line. And then, just how practical matters, like how are you going to deal with snow and not increase the water flow with all that impervious surface right there. So that's it. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Let's see if there are any other members of the public. I don't see any, or other counselors who are not on land use. If you think that you want to speak, do raise your hand. Pam Wright. See, I urged you. Go ahead, Pam.
I was going to wait until other people talk. This is a lot of building on the lot. I would have liked to see a reduced FAR. The massing, I know they don't have to meet FAR, but it's more than what would be allowed by right. The front of the house is not inviting whatsoever to the street. It would be nice to have it inviting to the street instead of the way it is right now. It
Recording in progress.
I'm sorry, I clicked something I shouldn't have.
It's kind of like turning its back on the neighborhood and the street. And I did get one person that lives on the street was never invited to a neighborhood meeting with the developer. I was wondering if the developer met with any of the neighbors as a group.
Do you want Mr. Morris to answer that question right now, or
Yes,
do you have a
please.
few other? Okay, Mr. Morris.
Yes, my client basically knocked on doors over the last several days with a copy of the plans and met with the abutters and abutters to abutters. I do have other comments to make in response to the previous speakers at the appropriate time.
Okay, and it's only just in the last couple of days, so not further out, and only 2 doors down and across the street? Is that the only people that he did go to?
The direct abutters and the abutters to those abutters.
Okay.
That is correct.
And across the street too, or no?
People across the street, as Dr. Keeler, they are abutters, yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Pam, you might want to provide Mr. Morris with the name of that person who wasn't approached if this is going to go on and do a little more community neighborhood outreach. iPhone? Kathy Keel, I'll come back to you. I'll just take people who haven't spoken yet.
Hi, that's me, Fran Urardi. I actually live at 15 Oak Ave. So thank you very much for letting me speak. I agree with my neighbors that I'm not in favor of the tandem parking. And I live probably, 2-3 houses down. No one knocked on my door. It would have been nice because we could have talked about this as neighbors. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Urardi. Kathy Keel, go ahead again.
Yes, apparently the developer did knock on my door. One of my children was home and spoke briefly and was shown some plans and had no idea what was going on. And so it would have been nice if there had been some more direct outreach. And I'm happy to meet and talk anytime.
I think Dr. Keel knows that we were scheduled to meet this afternoon along with the chair. Unfortunately, couldn't get down Oak Avenue because they were milling the street and wouldn't allow us to get within the site. Otherwise, I would have had the pleasure of meeting you once again, as we have in the past. I believe my client informed me that one of your adult sons answered the door and spoke with him, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering if perhaps a more concerted effort at a neighborhood meeting. I have been to several on this street for different projects. Given what we're hearing, you might want to ask your client if they would like to try that again with a little more notice and a little broader reach, perhaps, to talk with people so that they could understand what's going on and there could be buy-in. That's just an off-the-cuff remark by me. Let's hear from other members of the committee. Councillor Block, then Leary, then Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. Well, several of us visited this site this afternoon. Despite the milling of the street, it was quite an adventure. we met with a number of neighbors. The immediate neighbor said something very interesting about the rear area, the conservation.
Counselor Block, can you try and talk more directly into your
I'm
microphone?
sorry.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's better.
drifted away there. But the conservation land, which is immediately behind this structure, is adjacent to a wetland, which is behind the adjacent structure. And that caused me to wonder, what's the difference between the wetland behind one house and the conservation area behind the other? Is it the same? What are just the regulations around all that? And how sensitive should we be to all of that? I haven't encountered this before, so this will be an education for me and maybe others. This boundary line on the site plan indicating where the conservation area begins, which is not part of the planned construction, I understand that. But there are references to a floodplain that I've seen on some documents, and I understand floodplains change, and a lot of these floodplain maps are dated because of the change in precipitation patterns that are being experienced everywhere, including here. So I'm very interested in learning more about that, whether this floodplain line is based on certain metrics, certain maps, and when those metrics were taken and when those maps became official, and if they're likely to be updated. I mean, it may take years for all these floodplain maps to be updated. I want our planning department or somebody to inform us to the best of their knowledge what the implications are for this floodplain labeling on our map. So
Good
it
questions.
sounds like I should stop now and let other people
We
talk.
can try and
but
tackle some of it, though.
I'll tell you, I may come back to this later, but this is a historic house. It was evaluated by the Historic Preservation. There was a vote by 4-3 that this not be declared preferably preserved. I think that's significant, even though it lost 4-3. I think we should take this very seriously in terms of the impact on the neighborhood, and I will want to come back to that at another time. Thank you.
Ms. Wewell, could you put the plan up that shows the line of the floodplain so we could be looking at that visually? And I'm going to let Mr. Morris address some of your questions about floodplain and historic, but we do know that this project did go through Newton Historic Commission, and it was evaluated, and it was by a vote of 4-3 decided not to be preferably preserved. You're right, close vote anyway. And they also met with Jennifer Steele of the Conservation Commission and talked about the wetlands and floodplain behind it, and that's probably Mr. Morris might want to talk a little more about here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to respond to the questions posed by Ms. Keel as well as Councilor Wright and Councilor Block. I have before me a letter dated October 2nd from Jennifer Steele. My client inherited a friendly enforcement order from the Conservation Commission because of actions taken by the previous owner. I immediately, first thing before we even considered filing for special permit, I said to my client, you need to hire a hydrologist and talk to the Conservation Commission and resolve this issue, which he did, long before we filed this application. As a result, I have a letter here to my client, dear Mr. Zhu, August 2nd. I won't read the whole thing. Basically what it says is the Conservation Commission's determination of applicability under the Wetlands Protection Act and the Floodplain Watershed Protection Ordinance. And she made a determination. He says, since you have successfully restored the city's floodplain by reestablishing the 52-foot contour and flood storage capacity between 50 and 52 feet, as confirmed with the survey and accepted by the commission. With the enclosed negative determination, the commission officially closes the friendly enforcement order. I suggest that that should be dispositive, given Ms. Steele's expertise in the matter. I would point out that the curb cuts, I think there was a mention, Ms. Keel mentioned the curb cuts, the number of curb cuts. There are, in fact, 2 curb cuts on the site now. They would be consolidated into 1 curb cut. The other question, I think that Councilor Wright had talked about the FAR. This property, yes, it has a by right FAR of 0.38, but if you are able to meet the new lot setbacks, which we would be able to do, the FAR increases with the bonus to 0.40, which is exactly where we are now. So floor area ratio should not be a consideration for that reason. The other thing I would point out when they talk about how much building is on here, I have to sit there and list through the previous petition on a 9,000 square foot lot when my client's sitting on 29,000 square feet. As a result, all of the measures in the ordinance, all the dimensional controls, we are only looking for relief on putting a driveway within setback, which is the existing condition, by the way, and the side setback, one side setback. All of the other criteria, 69% open space, 17% lot coverage, which is almost half as much as would be the 30% would require by right. There's no standard here that we don't comply with that would say that this project is overly built. The size of the unit, 2,600 square feet, by all accounts, is not excessive. And of course, the by right alternative, which I never like to talk about because it's always perceived incorrectly, but the by right alternative, of course, is 2 larger units. Your committee knows that, and that would be units in excess of 4,000 square feet. And as I understand the direction of the committee, that's not the direction that the Land Use Committee and the council wants to go. Appreciate the opportunity to respond, and I'm here to respond to any other questions people may have.
Thank you. You may want to just stay standing there then. You might have some other questions
Yeah,
coming
I'm
your
sure.
way.
I took a nap today, what can I say?
Do you have good shoes on? Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Morris, I believe half the lot is in the wetlands, although it's true with Jennifer Steele, our chief environmental planner, in her letter, she said none of the lot is subject to the federal FEMA regs, thank you for your action on that. But that is Dolan Pond, a very good birding spot, I have to say. It is very wet, and I share some of the current concerns that have been raised about living in this day and age of much heavier precipitation. We cannot act like we did in the past. We have to have stricter rules and better regulations and protect the city from flooding. And even though we're looking at this one project, as my comments before were, I think we need to look more holistically, and that's outside the purview of what we're doing now. I understand that, but it always gets me thinking about it, about other type of zoning that we need to put in place and about even stricter stormwater issues that we might need to think about. What else did I want to say about here? I noticed, listening to the neighbors, of course, is always very important. And I'm on a similar street where I've lived there 20 years. I've seen at least 6, 7 knockdowns. And some of them are very nice, but I think the city needs to have a better plan going forward in terms of what we want our city to look like as we deal with climate impacts and the need for housing. There's a lot of things to talk about. But there's really, on one side of the street has like no sidewalks or very inadequate sidewalks. Considering this is right near a park, that would be something that would concern me. So those are just some of the things that are coming up to me. I'm certainly not prepared to vote on this evening. I think I need to think about it more and get more information, and I have more questions. And the hour is late, but
Fair enough.
so I do strongly prefer special permits to by right, no question about it. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but I think there's a lot to think about here. It is very close to a wetland. And anything you do outside the wetland impacts the wetland. We've seen increasing in wetness of Dolan Pond as well as Cold Spring Park. Some of that's due to the work we're doing with our water sewer, as we're not sending as much of our stormwater to the, what island does it go to? Deer Island. To Deer Island, more of that groundwater is staying in place. I've noticed that as well. So I'll leave it at that and listen to some of the other questions or concerns that my colleagues have.
Thank you, Councilor Leary. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question for planning. How close is the rear of the building to the area of the lot that's under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission? Just want to know how much further the building could go back.
So that's not dimensioned on the plan. It looks like, so I can share my screen also to just show what I'm
Please.
looking at. So I'm looking at the proposed site plan. Oh, that's not it. Hold on. Okay. So I'm sort of looking at this 5-foot metric for the parking and kind of using that to guesstimate since it isn't dimensioned. So I would guess it's probably a little bit more than 5 feet here. I would be interested if Attorney Morris knows the distance or if he has any anyone from the development team who would know. But I think, you know, these contour lines can give us some information, but ultimately it's not dimensioned.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, it's that darker line to the left of the screen that has the lines in it. Is that the area that we're talking about?
It's the red line.
Yes.
Red line.
Oh, it's the red line.
The red
Oh,
line.
Yeah.
okay. All right.
The darker line is a wall.
Darker
Oh,
line is the
that's
retaining wall.
That's a retaining wall. Got it. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing because I was a little confused with all,
Yeah,
with all
sorry,
the
I think
lines.
I
Yeah, that's
added
all right.
to that.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
We're having a training session soon on how to read plans. I hope you all attend.
I will definitely attend that training. Thank you. Mr. Morse, your client is building into the side setback. I think your side setback is at 11 feet, which is greater than the by right two-family setback.
That is the only relief requested for the building.
Yes,
That
I
is
am
correct.
well aware of that.
And as you know, that this is an old lot. The old lot requirement is 7.5. The new lot is 10.
I know. I remember the conversation from 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, I was here.
I know you were here. But your neighbor, are they aware that you're building into the setback when it for a single family attached should be
The people
25?
the people who abut us are the people who sold us the property. They're well aware of the development.
They sold you that, so they own both lots.
That's correct.
Oh,
The people to the north of us are the same owners of the people who sold my client the property.
okay.
One of the direct abutters.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I guess you didn't need to knock on their door, right?
They wanted him to purchase the other one. He declined.
All right. So we heard from I can't remember Ms. Keel that you were unable to reach her in the days and weeks leading up to this.
Unable to what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Unable to reach her
Ms.
about a
who?
community meeting.
No, I said my client knocked on the door and spoke to her adult son who answered the door at the time she was not at home.
I would have preferred if he would have spoken with her.
That's fine.
Yeah.
As I said, I made the opportunity to do that this afternoon. Unfortunately, I was unable to get there.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I'm gonna suggest that we hold this item to allow you and your client.
I don't have a problem with that.
All right. To allow you and your client to meet up with Ms. Keel, and we heard from another neighbor, Mr. Urardi. I was hoping you and your client can reach out to them about this project. She did raise one interesting thing, and I didn't know this about the site, is that she said it's a narrow street, parking is difficult. That is, clearly not your fault or your client's fault, but she did say that it's tandem parking, and with tandem parking, it is likely that the cars may choose not to park in the parking lot and park on the street. So have you given any consideration about redesigning it so that you don't have tandem parking on site?
I think it's timely that last night the council voted on a petition my client had to amend a permit and lost by one vote. I'm not going to make that mistake again by reducing the parking from what was proposed here as I did in that project.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting have you considered redesigning the project so that you don't have tandem parking? I'm fine with the eight stalls. It's just the fact that I worry is what Ms. Keel said, is that the cars may not park on site due to the fact that it's tandem parking.
Tandem parking is actually in front of a garage, as you probably know, is actually a way to reduce the amount of paved area, because if it's not tandem in front of the garage, it's going to be on some other portion of the site, freestanding. That increases significantly impervious area.
You could use permeable pavers.
We are going to use impervious. We are going to use pervious pavers. That was the first point I made in my presentation for all 4 driveways, reducing the pervious amount by 1,026 square feet.
I guess, so you're not going to consider redesigning the parking for the 4 stalls not in the garage?
I don't think that's appropriate, but that's my personal opinion, having done this for quite some time.
Okay, well, I guess what the neighbor was saying was that they're concerned that they're not going to park on site and they could park on the street.
That's one neighbor, that's not the neighborhood.
Well, okay, well, we only heard from 2 or 3 neighbors tonight.
From one who's up the street about 100 yards.
And we heard from another one who hasn't met with you or your client.
The fact of the matter is, have you been to the site? Have you been to the site? Because if you
I have been on the site. I've been on the street.
Excuse me, let me interject for a second here. I don't want to get into a back and forth conversation, and I would like us to soon wrap this up. I think we're hearing enough questions. Your first time before us, you're getting feedback and suggestions, and you'll have a few more before the end of the night. And I suspect Councilor Lucas, on my behalf, is going to make a motion to hold this. But let's not do this
all right. I'm gonna
exchange.
change the topic. So I was reading the memo, and it said that the retaining wall was going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 feet in height. Presumably that you're changing the grade 1 to 3 feet. There'll be an increase in grade of 1 to 3 feet in height, and your maximum building height is 34.8 feet. If you remember the conversation I had with Attorney Lee a little while ago, I wanted to assure that the top of the building would not be greater than 36 feet in height. But if I'm looking at this correctly, you're going to be closer to 38 feet. So I was wondering.
Correct. There's a drop off. There's a difference between building 1 and building 2. Building 2 is actually 3.5 feet lower on the site than building 1 is. And so the average grade, if you look closely at the profiles on the proposed conditions plan, you'll see that. The average grade is a difference of 3.5 feet on the front. And the reason why there was an increase in site, there was an increase in site at that point, and it says in the midpoint of the lot, meaning the midpoint between the 2 buildings, that was to create a flat level surface so that you had one plane for the front building and a second plane for the next building. That's why the building was increased that 3 feet at that point to accommodate that change in grade.
So again, I'll ask the same question I'll ask you that I asked Mr. Lee. If I'm standing on the sidewalk and I'm looking at the top point of the house, how high is it going to be?
It's going to be 34. Building 1 is going to be 34 point.
Can you speak into the mic?
34.5 feet, building 1.
Say that again, please.
34.51 feet.
34.51.
That is the height of the building on an average grade that sits 60.19.
And that's including the grade change?
That is including the grade change.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome.
So yeah, only thing I'm going to suggest is that you and your client reach out to the abutters who you were unable to connect with.
Point well taken.
All right, I'm all set, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. President Laredo.
So I'm not going to comment on the grade change issue this evening. But I certainly want, when this comes back to us, I want assurance from the planning department that there in fact is no grade change that would contribute to the building being higher on the site at 34 whatever than it would be as if it was built today. But Attorney Morris, I'm going to be very clear on the record about something, okay? I will not vote for any special permit on a project like this without a neighborhood meeting having been conducted well in advance. We have had this conversation over and over and over in this committee, and I've been on this committee now for a long time. We've also communicated that desire quite clearly to our planning department, so I expect that they've communicated that with you. So you don't have to respond, but I'm just being crystal clear. I am not voting for any special permit in the future on a project like this or any other development that's beyond it, just an addition to a house, unless a neighborhood meeting has been done in advance, not 2 days before you show up here, because by then it's too late to change a single thing. And the whole purpose of the neighborhood meeting is to get people's input into what you are contemplating so they have an opportunity to be heard at the outset, so they have a chance to shape it. So frankly, you can get your project through here easier and much more expeditiously. I'll leave it at that. I'm ready to move to hold this vote.
Thank you, President Laredo. I think we're all about ready for that. I'd just like to sum up a couple of things. Again, this is your first shot at it. I think you're getting some comments and things to take back to the owner/developer and to bring up at the neighborhood meeting, which I hope I understood that you will be planning. There are a couple of things in terms of, Councilor Lucas mentioned rethinking the parking lot layout. For instance, I would say one thing that might address several of the issues here, we've got a concern over flooding and climate change and increasing wetland and water retention. We've got density issues. Perhaps ask your client if they would consider 3 units instead of 4, and the front unit might be a smaller unit, and the rear ones, and then it may free up some space to do a different kind of parking configuration. Just one thing that pops in my mind as a site planner. I know that changes the numbers for a developer, but it would also address parking and flooding. You could then move things back a little further away from that floodplain. You do not have to answer any of these questions tonight. I'm just putting them out there for you. The density, the setback issue. I too, and it's kind of a personal thing, there are some precedents on this street for it, but I don't like the front doors being on the sides when you're, as I think Councilor Leary said it, or maybe it was Councilor Wright, this layout is not greeting the street, it's not welcoming to the street. You've got to enter the units on the side. Again, I think rethinking some of this layout might help. So I think those are all the things that I was writing down that I heard from people. I would very much like to thank Kathy Keel, Mark Johnson, and Fran Urardi for showing up as Oak Ave neighbors and talking tonight. And they might help you get out the word for a neighborhood meeting, because they're all very well connected, longtime residents. Maybe one of them will even offer their home for it, who knows. I do think we have a motion about to be made. You didn't already make it, or did you?
I think we each made the motion.
We did? Let's be clear on who's making a motion.
I will make the motion to hold.
To keep the public hearing and hold this item. Let's vote on that.
Counselor Block?
Aye.
Counselor Farrell?
Aye.
Counselor Kelly?
Aye.
Counselor Leary?
Aye.
Counselor Lovovitz?
Aye.
Counselor Lucas?
Aye.
Counselor Laredo?
Aye.
Motion passes.
We're done. Thank you, everyone. 10:03. Oh, so close. So close to being 110. If I hadn't spoken, we would have been done before.